Getting quiet. We may, my clock still says 6:29, but let's go ahead and get started. We'll begin the 6:30 business meeting with a moment of silence, please. Oh, wait, before we do that, I forgot, we have to come out of our closed meeting.
I move that this council certify by a recorded vote that to the best of each council member's knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempted from the open meeting requirements of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act and identified in the motion convening the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered in the closed meeting.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, let's vote, please. It passes 5-0. Thank you. Now we can begin the business meeting, and we'll have a moment of silence, please. Thank you. Thank you. Councilors, any announcements? Hearing none, we have a couple of proclamations. Vice Mayor Wade?
Yes, I have a proclamation for Digital Inclusion Week. Whereas broadband service plays an important role in civic and cultural participation, lifelong learning, and access to essential services for communities in the city of Charlottesville and nationally, nearly half of all people who are digital disconnected are people of color and are less likely to have a broadband internet connection or a desktop or laptop at home. And whereas the city of Charlottesville remains committed to closing the digital divide for its residents, including collaboration with the Regional Digital Equity Coalition partners, including Albemarle County Broadband Accessibility and Affordability Office, the University of Virginia, Charlottesville City Schools, JABA, Jefferson Madison Regional Library, the Blue Ridge Health District, the Piedmont Housing Alliance, all of whom are working to launch programs that address barriers to digital equity, including distributing Wi-Fi hotspots, providing digital skills training, distributing laptops and tablets, and coordinating the development of a digital equity plan. And now therefore be it proclaimed that the city of Charlottesville declares that the week of October the 2nd through the 6th, 2023, as Digital Inclusion Week in Charlottesville. Signed and sealed the 2nd day of October, J. Lloyd Snook III, Mayor.
Thank you. And we're presenting this to Sue Moffett and Jason Ian Fuentes.
Jason from Albemarle County's Leaders Coalition will accept it.
All right. Anything you want to say to us briefly?
Yes, Mayor, Snook, councilors, on behalf of this coalition, thank you for this recognition. I'd like to take a moment to thank the rest of our coalition, including Sue Moffett with City DSS, Jen Fleischer from the Blue Ridge Health District, Ginger Dillard from the Jefferson Area Board for Aging, Catherine Fay from the Jefferson Madison Regional Library, our partners with Albemarle County and Charlottesville Public Schools, the Equity Center at the University of Virginia, Network to Work and TJ Ace at Piedmont Virginia Community College, the Broadband Office at the Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development, and the National Digital Inclusion Alliance for organizing this week to celebrate digital inclusion efforts. Digital inclusion happens when everyone in a community has access to the digital resources they need to participate in our modern world. And the result is a more connected community that is able to take part in online learning, enroll in needed services, participate in e-commerce, receive telehealth services, and possibly most of all, connect with their community, whatever shape it might take. This coalition formed to develop sustainable partnerships and programs to address barriers to digital access throughout our community. I am delighted to accept this proclamation on behalf of all of those that this work will benefit, and appreciate your time and attention.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Now, our next proclamation, Fire Prevention Week.
Sure. Proclamation. Fire Prevention Week, October 8th through 14th, 2023, Cooking Safety Starts with You. Whereas the City of Charlottesville is committed to ensuring the safety and security of all who live and visit our city, and whereas fire is a serious public safety concern and homes are the locations where people are at greatest risk from fire, home fires killed more than 2,800 people in the United States in 2021, according to the National Fire Protection Association. And whereas the fire departments in the United States responded to 338,000 home fires in 2021, and since January 1st, 2023, the Charlottesville Fire Department has extinguished over 60 building fires and more than 70 kitchen fires contained to the stove or container. And whereas cooking is the leading cause of home fires in the United States, 2 of every 5 home fires start in the kitchen, with 31% of these fires resulting from unattended cooking, and more than half of reported non-fatal home cooking fire injuries occurred when the victims tried to fight the fire themselves. And whereas children under 5 face a higher risk of non-fire burns associated with cooking than being burned in a cooking fire, Charlottesville residents should turn pot handles toward the back of the stove, always keep a lid nearby when cooking, keep a 3-foot kid-free zone around the stove, oven, and other things that could get hot, watch what they heat, and set a timer to remind them that they are cooking. And whereas residents who have planned and practiced a home fire escape plan are more prepared and will therefore be more likely to survive a fire. And whereas working smoke alarms cut the risk of dying in reported home fires by almost half, through a recent community development block grant, CF Charlottesville Fire Department installed 408 smoke alarms, 807 stovetop fire stops, and 469 carbon monoxide detectors, and continues to offer installations for city residents. And whereas the 2023 Fire Prevention Week theme, Cooking Safety Starts with You, Pay Attention to Fire Prevention, reminds us to stay alert and use caution when cooking to reduce the risk of kitchen fires. Now, therefore, the Charlottesville City Council proclaims October 8th through 14th, 2023 as Fire Prevention Week, and we urge all residents and cooking establishments to check their kitchens for fire hazards, to use safe cooking practices throughout the year, and to support the public safety activities and efforts of the Charlottesville Fire Department.
Thank you. And for Chief Thomas and Joe Phillips.
Just quickly, I want to thank y'all very much, Mayor and councilors, for this. And we'll be out in the public all week next week doing pop-up events in neighborhoods, so look for our press release this week. And then our stations will be open Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, 4:30 to 6:30 for anyone to stop by Ridge Street or Fontaine and visit the fire station. We'll have public safety material for them and stuff.
Great.
All right. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you coming. Okay, next, boards and commission appointments. Is there a motion?
Yes. I move that we appoint Lindsay Idison to the Retirement Plan Commission.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Cast your vote, please. 5-0, the motion passes. Thank you. Ms. Thomas, would you please read the consent agenda?
Okay. Consent agenda number 3, minutes, July 17th, regular meeting. There was a correction to page 2 of the minutes under item number 2, so a Scrivener's error has been corrected and posted. September 12th, joint City Council Planning Commission public hearing. Number 4, resolution to appropriate funds from the Bureau of Justice Assistance, FY 2022 Patrick Leahy Bulletproof Vest Partnership, $16,942, one of 2 readings. 5, resolution to appropriate Virginia Department of Emergency Management Performance Grant, $7,500, one of 2 readings. 6, resolution to appropriate VDOT TAP funding for Meadow Creek Trail and Bridges, $800,000, one of 2 readings. 7, resolution to appropriate Virginia Juvenile Community Crime Control Act grant, $452,704, one of 2 readings.
Thank you. So we'll now take public comment Regarding items on the agenda just read by the deputy clerk, each speaker will have up to 3 minutes. In the Zoom webinar, you may select the raise hand option to be placed in the speaker queue. If you joined by phone and wish to speak on the consent agenda, you may press *9. We will alternate in-person and virtual speakers. This is only to talk about those 5 items. The things that I suspect most of you are here to talk about are not for right now, but will be in a couple of minutes. Is there anybody in council chambers who would like to speak on one of the consent agenda items? Seeing no one, is there anyone online who would like to speak on a consent agenda item?
Yes, Mayor Snook, I see what appears to be 6 individuals on here with raised hands that all have the same name, so I can certainly call on one of them,
All right.
and we'll see what happens. Jim Conley, you are on with council.
You guys hear me? Hello?
Yep.
You are very faint, but we can hear you.
All right, how about now?
There we go.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the bulletproof vests.
Okay.
So I believe we need to buy more bulletproof vests. Just, these are for the police, right?
Right.
Yeah, definitely get more bulletproof vests for the police because all these crazy niggers that are just running around shooting people, you can't be too safe. You can't cut me off. It's called the First Amendment.
Actually, we can't. You have 3 minutes, sir. Be aware that that kind of rhetoric is not very persuasive.
Well, it's not about being persuasive. I'm just telling the truth. I mean, look at the crime rates. I mean, across the United States. Excuse me, I'm speaking. Can you tell the nigger she-boon to shut her mouth? I'm trying to speak here. So 60% of all violent crime is done by...
Actually, it
7% of our
is protected
population.
by the First Amendment, unfortunately.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
60% of all violent crime is done by those niggers. So, you know, it's about time that white people like me stood up for ourselves and called this out. Because we didn't even bring the niggers here. It was the Jews. The Jews owned all the slave ships, and they brought them here, and now we have to deal with their fucking chimney.
Mr. City Attorney, are we allowed to cut things off? I'm sorry?
Yes, sir.
All right, then let's cut it
Hell,
off.
Hitler, white.
Cut it off. Okay.
Defamatory conduct, that would be one thing, but the gross insult of the members of this community is unacceptable, even under the broadest interpretations of the First Amendment.
Okay.
And you condone that speech?
Nope.
Obviously.
So, is the speaker, okay, it's not still with us. All right, is there anybody else who would like to speak on the topic of one of these consent agenda items? Okay, hearing nothing else, is there any question or comment from council?
Yeah, I'd be interested a little more about the $800,000 from VDOT to the Meadow Creek Trail. That seems pretty cool. Chris?
Do we,
Chris is.
yeah.
Certainly, we have been working on constructing a trail from Greenbrier Park over to Mickey Drive. This is a large chunk of that trail system's been funded through Department of Transportation, Department of Conservation and Recreation, local money, some of our TARP money, some of our surplus. So it's a conglomeration of state, federal, multi-state, and multi-local funds. VDOT authorized an additional $800,000 to make sure we get this project across the finish line. So it's $800,000 more money to put into this large 2 bridges and trails that connect that whole system behind Seminole Square up to Virginia Institute of Autism and over to Greenbrier Park.
That's fantastic.
Thank you. We're excited.
Yeah, and one of the consequences of this is to allow Mickey Drive properties to be connected to Greenbrier School.
Definitely. We know a lot of those kids there walk and ride bikes to schools,
Right.
and these bridges will make it a lot easier for them.
Okay. Thank you.
And the $800,000 will complete the project?
With some city money as well.
It'll add to the overall pot we have for the project, which is just about to get through all of its engineering and design hurdles and go to construction bids soon. So this money's right on time.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Any further questions or comments? If not, let's see, do we get a motion?
I move for approval of the consent agenda.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, please cast your vote. Okay, passes 5-0. Next, Mr. Sanders, is there a report from the city manager's office?
Yes, sir, there is. Good evening, councilors and members of the public. Just have a couple remarks in advance of me actually moving through the presentation of my work plan, as well as responding to our priority with the homeless intervention strategy. I just want to start with saying that today is my 61st day as your city manager. As planned, tonight I present to you the work plan that will guide what I will be doing for the next year or the rest of this fiscal year. But before I review that document with you, I felt that it was important for me to make a few remarks in regards to what has actually been happening in our community for the past couple weeks. In July, when council identified me as the choice to serve as the next city manager, I made a few observations about Charlottesville that I think are important for me to restate tonight. Charlottesville is consistently punching above its weight class. That makes us exceptional when comparing efforts to cities 3 and 10 times our size. I noted that we are striving to make a difference in the lives of all of our residents, and I'm emphasizing all. I acknowledge that we absolutely do have 2 life experiences in our city, and we must continue to bridge that divide. I also said that we must intervene with long-enduring and appropriate efforts to reduce gun violence. We have to produce and preserve affordable housing. We have to work to effectively address the many challenges facing our unhoused population. And we have to ensure that this government remains strong, functional, financially sound, and disciplined. And finally, I said, I accept this assignment to lead the charge, and I look forward to talking with anyone who is willing to not only engage in problem identification, but also solution consideration. I do not make decisions from the dais. I do not do knee-jerk reactions. I strive to solve problems, not just identify them and talk about them at the surface. I did not decide to lift the closing hours of Market Street Park under duress or without regard for our police department. I actually made the decision to protect our officers and the unhoused. I did not want to subject any of them to any additional interaction that could go terribly wrong. And I wanted to give our chief the opportunity to fully assess the situation, which has now been done. I recognize the situation is uncomfortable, untenable, and unsustaining. But for 10 days now, I have been buried in obvious statements, impossible demands, untrue assertions, and most definitely a series of angry messages expressing disappointment, disregard, disrespect, and dismay. I've been told to tell people to get out of the park, give us our park back. I don't care where they go. You are focused on the wrong thing. I'll admit that has been hard to hear. Not because I can't take the criticism, but because I can't accept that the desire to transfer a problem is the right way to go. We need to solve the problem. I don't apologize for caring about people. I won't apologize. It is people and process that I have repeatedly referenced as what matters to me the most. The challenges facing the unhoused population is a total community issue. I understand that we have never had a comprehensive plan for addressing homelessness. I now commit to seeing that one gets built. I have a caring staff who have been working well beyond their scope to fill gaps as they recommend a host of actions only to see them never move forward. I've assured them we will move. I myself have heard criticism of service providers directly from members of the unhoused community. And while I don't believe everything that I hear, I want to take those concerns to those individuals, and I want to talk to them about them, and let's figure out how to fix that, and let's how to continue to focus on continuing to help the people who need them. Council recently adopted a vision that states Charlottesville will be a place where everyone thrives. I submit that the reference to everyone in this vision should include even those who don't have an address. So now I'm going to move on with the action plan, and this is just the moment I felt it was necessary to let everybody know who I am. And I can't get this to work. That's who I am.
If I could just state very briefly, we've gotten some emails from folks expecting us to, this is some of the direct words, discipline our city manager, criticize him for this action. And I want to say affirmatively, we are not going to do that. This is why we hired him as our city manager. So thank you.
So enough of that. So let's move on. Let's get to work. This is what this is all about. This is about work. This action plan covers the period of August 1st, 2023 to June 30th, 2024. It is based on my start date, which is in this current fiscal year, going through June 30th of next year. I'm going to present a new fiscal year work plan to council in July. At the start of each fiscal year is the intention. The work plan will be directly tied to council's strategic plan. I will provide quarterly progress reports by updating the document, reviewing during my report, and replacing an online version so that the public can actually see that as well. This document will be emailed to council and posted on the city manager's page tomorrow, and that is what I wanted to make sure everyone understood. The format of this work plan is based on SMART goal setting models: specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time-bound. That's why it's laid out the way that you see it there. Council adopted 9 strategic outcome areas and a commitment to JEDI, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion.
Excuse me, I can't hardly read that. I can't read that.
Oh, it's right behind you.
Oh, cool. All right.
All right, thank you. David, can you make it a little bit bigger just because it is? I don't know if you can. But there, with 9 strategic outcome areas and a commitment makes it 10. That's a lot. And I've shared that with council that is a lot. What I'm going to do tonight is just highlight 4 of them and just show you how the document works. This is me teaching you how to use the document as the public. When you look at it, you'll know how to look at it and what it'll do and what it'll tell you. So the first column are action items. Those are the things that we are committing to do under each of the bolded items at the top, which are the strategic outcome areas for council. All 9 of them plus the commitment appear in this document. It's a multi-page, 8-page document. Those action items are the things that we're going to work on specifically. The target measure is how we're going to measure success. What is it that we're going to do that is then going to be looked at the end of this fiscal year, and these 5 will tell me if I've done a good job or not. The completion date is the time bound. That is when we're going to have it done. You see some things don't have dates because we're still trying to figure those out, and as I give you updates, we will put those dates in there so that everyone will see that as well. Ideally, the plan is to take the references to quarter, like it says third quarter under operationalized JEDI, under completion date, third quarter, second quarter, second quarter. At some point, I will change that to a specific date so that we'll be able to tell you exactly when it'll be ready, when it'll be presented, and when people can actually react to what it is. So in looking at the commitment to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, I put that first because it was council's commitment that they decided they wanted to make sure was prominent across their strategic plan. The commitment is that this is going to be effort that we undertake across the entire organization. Our Deputy City Manager for Racial Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, Ashley Marshall, is responsible for leading this charge. So she's going to be putting together a performance framework that'll be laying out exactly what's going to get done. We identified that we wanted to have an Office of Equity and Inclusion. We'll be renaming that, of course, now that we're saying JEDI and not just Equity and Inclusion. But that will be a commitment to develop a work plan specifically to that area where all departments will engage in identifying what are they doing in the equity space. The goal is to make sure that it is not just happening at the top, it is happening everywhere. That is how we can make the difference and make the changes that we're saying that we want to make. I like that voice. So we're going to pursue the implementation of critical response programming. So if you see that as the 4th item under the commitment to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, that's Marcus Alert, Alternative Response Team, opioid abatement. These are big things. We got information from the state that doesn't tell us exactly how to do those things. We have to figure those things out. There's work that needs to be done. What I'm showing you in the resource allocation column is who's going to be doing that work. So each of these columns, each of these boxes is going to have maybe one person, if it's only one person doing the work, or if it's 10 people doing the work. I've identified those 10. So you see in that particular box, there are 7 people that are identified. And they're not the only ones doing the work, but they're the 7 leaders of that work. They'll be working together. And then the notes section will tell you things that I'll be notating along the way. Maybe that we had a hiccup, we've been set back, we're not going to necessarily get this done at this point, or surprise, we found out about this, or we landed money to do this. I'll be able to report on that as well. So it's meant to be an interactive document, but it actually is a roadmap. This is to tell you where I'm going based on what they have told me they wanted to get done. When you, the community, take a look at it, then ultimately I hope that you will find that everything that we've been talking about is there in some form or fashion. So I'm going to move on to the next topic, is affordable housing. That's there in the middle. There's not a whole lot there because we got to figure out a whole lot of things that we can do, but we are implementing an affordable housing plan, which is a very good document. It's very detailed, very complex in what it says that we need to do. There are specific target measures that I'm identifying that we should be able to make significant progress on, get some serious traction on, and then we may add additional items to that depending on what develops over the course of the rest of the next few months. And again, in resource allocation, you see that's 5 people there, 7 people there that are doing that work. I have developing a homeless intervention strategy. We're going to go there in just a second, go a little bit deeper into that. I've identified an internal work group, and I've asked Ashley Marshall to lead that effort because I think it's important for us to make sure that we can go where we need to go on that issue. And that means we have to go deep. There's a lot to be done. The last thing that I'm going to focus on just for this document is about organizational excellence. This is important for us as a government. In order for the government to be responsive, we have to be strong. We have to be sustained. We have to be available, and we have to be responsive. So I'm recognizing that and identifying that this is an important priority for us. Council made it an important priority. And then I'm laying out in this document what are some of the things that we're doing. First there that you see, rebuild staff capacity, and that's simply hiring a bunch of people for a bunch of vacancies that we have. But there's more. Improving our staff morale. If our staff are happy at doing their job, they serve our public better. I believe that to my core. I have said that since I've been here to every employee that works here. They have heard 2 words from me: service and impact. We have to give good service, and we impact lives all day, every day. It is important for us to lead that way and live that way. And I'm doing everything that I can to support them and making them understand that that is not a choice, that is actually just a way that we should be. We're completing a compensation and class modernization effort. That box has a lot of things in there. That's a lot of work. Ultimately, that is the best way for me to improve staff morale, to be perfectly honest, because if people are coming to work and they feel like they're undervalued, they are not paid what they believe they are due, they won't necessarily be able to give me their best. If I can fix that, I can get their best, and I can at least ask for it. And if they don't give it to me, I can ask them to move along. So I think what we're trying to do here is just help everybody understand that we're working together. We're also integrating collective bargaining. That's a big, big project for us. It is going to be a very costly project for us. We're going with 3 units, police, fire, and transit. Others can join later. But there's a lot of work, and it is a process. It is something that we don't have control over how it goes until the very end when a contract is presented to me and I have to sign it or not, and then we do something else about it. The goal for me is to ensure that through our process, it won't be a question of whether or not I'll sign it. The goal will be that it makes sense and we will get that done and bring it to council. Producing a comprehensive communications plan. We need to do better at our engagement activities so that the public better understands what we're doing, how are we doing it, what can you do to help us, what do you want to do with us. I think there are ways that we can fix that, and we'll continue to work on that. And naturally, a balanced budget. We got to be able to stay within our means in order to do the things that we want to do. So you saw organizational excellence took up a whole page because it's important for us to remember if we're strong, we can be strong. All right, David, I think you go ahead and switch to the next sheet. I wanted to go deeper into homeless intervention because I know there's a lot of people who want to hear what I have to say in that regard. And I just want to be able to express to you that homeless intervention across this country is probably the #1 issue facing governments. I just got back today from being in Austin for a couple of days. Cut that trip short because I thought it was important for me to be back here. But every government leader that was there was talking about homelessness. They talked about it as a top priority. And we were in Austin, Texas, where they've done some amazing things, but yet I saw homeless individuals on the streets. So my point to everyone is that we will do our best to do the best that we can in this space. I think it's important that you see something like this soon in my tenure is to demonstrate that I'm committed to wanting to do something to make a difference about how we go about doing this work. Because this is not something that I understand that has ever been produced and put in front of anyone to say, here's the short term, here's some midterm, and here's some long term. Others may have it in regards to their organizations, but collectively, it is not my understanding that that is the case. So in the short term category, we're going to do some things, and we're working on some things. And Market Street Park has consumed the conversation. but it's not really the short term. It really isn't. There's some real serious short-term things that need to be done. We need to identify who can actually operate a shelter. That's number one. We need to know how many of them might actually be able to do overnight shelter, which is very different than just a day shelter, right? A day shelter is a good thing, but an overnight shelter is something altogether different because they're going to be there and somebody's going to stay awake and be involved in what's going on. It requires another skill set. It requires some additional things, some additional matters that have to be taken into consideration. It's a costly operation. It is not for the faint of heart. We recognize that. So we want to make sure that we understand how to support that. We need plans. We need to make sure that we understand how many beds can we support? How many beds do we need? Do we need less in the winter? Do we need more in the winter? I don't know. Those are the things that I have as questions that we've got to figure out. There's some midterm actions. We need to acquire a space so that we can make sure that there is a building of some size. But I'm not running to do that at this moment because I don't know how big that facility needs to be, and I don't know if it's 1, 2, or 3 facilities. Because in the population, there are differences amongst what the issues are, and we need to address them where they are. And that might mean that we have this facility does this one, this facility does this, and another facility that does this. And they can be all different sizes. I think that's part of the question. We need to do this from a regional perspective. Our regional partners is simply the county. That's who's going to be our partner. We're not going to get the support from the other counties around us where people are coming to get services here. But the county sees it, and they've already identified that they're interested, they're willing to support, and they want to be a part of the solution. I have a meeting this week. I had a conversation on Friday, and I have a meeting this week to continue that because I do believe that they're serious about joining us in that effort. I also want to point out that this is complex. There is no quick fix. There's no simple answer. There's no easy solution. It is going to be painful. The community has to appreciate that. It is going to hurt to be able to deal with this in more ways than one. One of the big ways is if you want me to really, really solve the problem in the best way that I know how, I would just say everybody who is willing to go to a local bank, open a change fund, and put as much money in it as you possibly can. It is a very, very expensive operation to do that. So that in itself says that this is not an easy thing for us to just wipe away as a problem. It doesn't happen that way. It is very, very complex. It's very complicated and costly. We need some midterm and long-term actions, and that's what I want to focus on and make sure that we are going somewhere, we're getting somewhere, and I'll come back and report to you how we're doing. This task force is made up of very qualified staff members of our team who've been working in this space for years, and they know some things that we need to do, and they have questions. We also need to go and sit down with more of our providers and find out what else and get their list. What is it that you want to do? What else can you do? How can you do that? Is it going to check as many of these boxes as possible? And then I'm just going to simply go back to say to you about Market Street Park. I never said it was permanent. The intention was to ensure that I could make sure that our police department and the unhoused population did not have any further negative interactions because I thought that was important. I wanted to give the chief the space that he needed to do the investigation that he did, and now that that is done, it is time for us to figure some things out. That is what we're working on. We are in conversation with Pacham to see if it's possible to open the shelter early. We are looking at additional locations that possibly could be made available to them. I think what I want everyone to understand and appreciate at this moment is we're trying. I'm not sitting here not doing anything. We are trying. We are having conversations. We're having conversations in different ways than we ever have had. And we're trying to figure out what is the best way to do it with dignity and to make sure that the individuals land in a better place. That's the point of any effort that we should undertake. So with that, I will stop and let you ask me any questions.
Councilors, any questions for Mr. Sanders?
Yeah, I really appreciate all of that. And the passion that you're, intensity that you're bringing to this this issue that is, very visible and important, I guess urgent, but also all the other things that are important in their own ways. And I really agree with your point about the organizational excellence. I think that is a failure to really tend to that over the last couple of decades, frankly, is one reason why we're struggling in so many ways. So I really applaud that. And, I know, as you said, when it comes around to funding things, that's when the proof will be in the pudding. And I certainly will do all I can to figure out how I can support you.
Yeah, I concur. Your comments about the morale of the staff is the utmost important. I think that if that will be critical as we move forward, because that was something that, you know, we heard a lot when we were campaigning about the morale of the staff, and that has an impact on how the city can carry out its services. And earlier we got an update on the budget. And I know that you've been working hard to address the Market Street issue over the weekend. We probably received several hundred emails on it, and I certainly didn't read every word of every last one, but I got the sense of them all, and it is a difficult issue to address. And I know that, you know, I'm glad you let the public know that this is something that we are working on. We're trying to find a solution, and it's just it's difficult. It's a difficult issue to address, but we're working on it.
Thank you for your attention to detail. What happened at our last meeting was unfortunate. I think it brought certain things to light, but it also, in my mind, let us know the following day that there was someone that has been selected to lead our city that cares about everyone that is sitting in this room. There's no difference, because he sees all of us in this room and in this community as human beings that need to be treated with respect. None of us have chosen our circumstances. And now Mr. Sanders is faced with addressing circumstances that are not palatable for anyone. No one wants to live outside. No one wants to sleep on a sidewalk. No one wants to be cold. And Mr. Sanders does not want that for anyone, whether you're on the property of Market Street or anywhere else. And he's committed to working with all of the people within the organization. He is committed to working with council. He is committed probably to opening that little account at an unnamed bank at this point, that people will go and put their pennies, their nickels, their dimes, their dollars. But he's willing to find the money to help. We can give lip service from now until the day the cows come home, as my grandma used to say. But at some point, we have to take action. But the thing that I hope all of us recognize is that it is a process, and it's going to take time. But you have before you, on my screen, on that screen, on this screen, and on that screen in the back, for the gentleman that couldn't see initially, short-term, mid-term, and long-term solutions. So we have to follow the process, because if we have a building tomorrow and that building isn't what it should be, we're right back where we started. We are right back where we started. And he's committed to not having anyone be treated inhumanely. So yes, a lot of people felt that on Tuesday, 2 weeks ago, Mr. Sanders made a knee-jerk reaction, but he did not. He took into consideration people. He took into consideration the people that lived in the Market Street Park. He took into consideration the employees of the CPD. And he allowed the CPD to do what it needed to do, because if action needed to be taken, our chief of police should be the person to do that. What you're seeing tonight is Mr. Sanders' actions for those persons that are currently in Market Street Park and beyond, because everybody's not in Market Street Park. There are people that are homeless or unhoused. I hear those words used interchangeably. I do not want to be disrespectful to anyone, so whichever one of those terms you feel that you're comfortable with, that is fine. But everyone is not in Market Street Park. But he is dealing with the collective of the homeless / unhoused. And we must give him and his team an opportunity to do their due diligence. Thank you.
Well, and there's not too much to add on top of that. I will say, eagerly await some of the budget requests. I know for myself, I'm absolutely ready and open this upcoming budget cycle for it to be one of our top priorities in terms of figuring out where we're going to invest that money, as well as some of the unspent accounts we have of one-time money from ARPA and other sources, looking at those as potential areas to make investments in the short term. And I will say again, if it wasn't clear, I think both the city manager and the council are legitimately open, from individual members of the public, nonprofits, private sectors, to come to the table with us with any ideas or solutions you have, because as you made clear, there are not any easy, overnight, or inexpensive solutions, and we are very open to any suggestions. And I know not everybody wants to work from the inside, that's not everybody's role, but whether we love it or hate it, the city and our zoning, our budget is going to have to play a role. There are 3 open seats on our Housing Advisory Committee that anyone can apply for and be part of that organization to try to inform our policy. And there are many other avenues that we're willing and waiting for people to come to us with. What is a solution? What's a budget allocation? What's a potential property for acquisition? Anything. So thank you.
Thank you. And let me just add, I've spent, oh boy, how many hours over the last week responding to the emails that we've gotten. And I'll tell you, the emails that I have personally received, about 100 on this topic, most of them are opposed to, they want us to kick people out of Market Street Park. Some cases they said we should do something about our city manager and so on. And I responded to all of them and basically explained why we were doing what we were doing, and what even if we didn't have the details of a plan yet, that we're working on a plan. We're working the problem, as they would say in NASA. But I also wanted to add one other thought. About half of the emails that we received were from people outside of Charlottesville. They were from Fluvanna County. Interestingly, there's a large contingent of people in Fluvanna who are very concerned about this issue. Lots of people from Albemarle. And I say this not because I want to make fun of their opinions or because I want to deride them, but to emphasize a very important point. Charlottesville being the center of this region, we have certain, we're the leaders in many ways. We are also the magnet for a lot of people, particularly when outlying counties specifically and intentionally try to be inhospitable to their own homeless people so that they will come to Charlottesville. I talked to one official from an outlying county who told me that's what they were trying to do. So this is not just me being conspiratorial, this is what they're telling me. The consequence, I think, is that we have to recognize that it is a regional problem, it will have a regional solution. And when I've written back to the people who live in Albemarle County, I have written back to say, please talk to your Board of Supervisors folks. I appreciate the fact that you're writing to city councilors, but talk to your leaders, your elected leaders, and let's get this thing figured out together. And I will say that I've talked to a number of the members of the Board of Supervisors recently, and they are interested in working together. This is not going to be a situation where we're fighting against them. I hope, will be working with them in a way that will help solve these problems. And Mr. Sanders, I really appreciate all of the time that you have spent. I have told people, and somebody was complaining that, well, he hasn't written me back. I said, well, he's been busy. So we'll work on that. I wrote back on your behalf. We'll work on that, and we'll get a solution. And I'm very impressed with what you've given to us. I do want to add one other thing. When I was fussing about city management issues over the last couple of years, I was noting that in 2019, our then city manager, Dr. Richardson, was given a laundry list from city council of like 74 things they wanted the city manager to be working on. And I said that, my reaction was, that's not a work plan. That's a laundry list. It's not a work plan. And so I was fussing at him about it. And so when I drafted a sort of initial effort to communicate with Mr. Sanders about what I thought a work plan ought to look like, I put about 8 or 10 items on there. And he comes back with his own, however, 6 pages or whatever. So if any of you sit there and say, wait a minute, wasn't Mr. Snook saying something about not having a laundry list for the city manager? Be aware, it's his list, okay? We appreciate the fact that you understand how many things there are that have got to be worked on, and we will certainly all be helping in every way we can. So thank you.
I think we can consider his city manager's report as his reply to all of the plethora of emails that people said, and he hasn't responded yet. So we'll consider this his response.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Community Matters, we have 8 pre-registered speakers. There were other folks who are listed on the wait list. Be aware that being on the wait list doesn't mean you necessarily become the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, and so on. But we will take the first 8 off the list, and then we'll open it up to 1 from here, 1 from online, 1 from here, 1 from online, until we get through 16. The way we do it is we get 16 up front at the beginning part of the meeting. There will be another opportunity for additional comment at the end of things, but only 16 right now so that we can get on to the other items that are on the agenda. So with that in mind, we've got 8 speakers. If one of them is unavailable, we'll move somebody up on the wait list. Is the first speaker available? I've got Matthew Hall as being the first speaker. Mr. Hall, you have 3 minutes.
Mayor Snook, councilors, thank you. Good evening. My name is Matthew Hall. I'm a lifelong resident of Charlottesville, and I have lived in an apartment on the downtown mall for the last 8 years. I'm here to talk about deteriorating conditions in our city's public spaces, especially the mall. Our city is attracting an increasing number of homeless individuals from jurisdictions across the state and even outside of Virginia. At the same time as this population is growing, the city has largely eliminated the tools of law enforcement designed to maintain order and civility in our city's public spaces. Joe Platania's office generally declines to prosecute disorderly conduct and similar offenses, and our understaffed police force is not going to make arrests that they know will not lead to charges. This means that when an individual is on the mall, screaming obscenities, throwing trash, and generally making the area a terrible place for anyone else to be, there is no response from our government, and they are free to continue doing so for as long as he likes. Open-air hard drug use, which unfortunately I witness on the mall on a regular basis, gets much the same response, which is to say, none. Antisocial behaviors that degrade public spaces for everyone, like public urination, blasting amplified music, and littering, are being allowed to run unchecked. The cumulative effect of the mix of policies from Mr. Platania's office, the police department, and this council is that what should be shared public spaces that are safe and hospitable for all of Charlottesville to use are being taken over by those who are most abusive of our city's permissive policies. The city's current approach of simultaneously providing relatively generous services and declining to police or prosecute these kinds of aggressive behaviors means that in practice, Charlottesville's residents are not being asked to share parks and public spaces. We are being asked to cede them. I expect many of the commenters here tonight are here specifically to discuss the encampment in Market Street Park and to encourage the city to make further accommodations for our growing homeless population. But the larger issue of increasingly inhospitable and unsafe public spaces is going to remain whether or not the city decides to re-implement the park curfew and whether or not the city decides to build a shelter. The problem is not just where people are going to sleep. It's how they are going to be permitted to behave in shared public areas. I hope the city sees this and will take action to rebalance law enforcement policies to include the rights of all of the city's residents to safe, welcoming public spaces. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hall.
Thank you.
So, the second person is Katie De La Cruz. Ms. De La Cruz, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening, Council. My name is Kadi. I'm a student at UVA here in solidarity with the unhoused community. I want to thank the city manager as well for taking this issue seriously. But I also want to remind the rest of the community of some things and some larger issues. So, seeing our community members with no other choice to live on the street should make us uncomfortable. Not because our unhoused neighbors are dangerous or because they pose us a threat. The violence we see in our community is because of the conditions that those in power have created, unlike the white supremacist logic we just heard in the speakers of this room. Instead of making an enemy out of somebody who is suffering, we need to make an enemy of the conditions that cause people to suffer in Charlottesville. There are larger issues that we must interrogate. It should make us uncomfortable that the city creates criminals when they write unhelpful policy, like outlawing panhandling on the downtown mall in 2011, which was ruled unconstitutional, or removing all the benches on the downtown mall so no one can rest there. It's not a coincidence that the downtown mall is a disappointment to tourists and locals who have nowhere to sit, and that our community members in crisis are now finding respite in parks. As a UVA student, it makes me uncomfortable the way my university has worked with Charlottesville's local government to harass unhoused people who find themselves near grounds, and how UVA has increased displacements of people and gentrification of communities not associated with the university by not providing more student housing, especially when many of the people that I stand here today to be in solidarity with come from communities that had their ancestors' labor stolen to build UVA and the rest of the city. It makes me uncomfortable that the Charlottesville police can spin the story to shame us out of speaking up about what we know is true. Charlottesville police demonstrated at its recent press conference that it is more interested in its reputation than keeping our community safe. I urge you all to use your power to divest money from the jail and the police, to reinvest your resources in things that can truly keep our community safe, like more affordable housing units. Additionally, you must permanently lift the curfew in the park so that more harm is not caused. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person on the list is Rebecca Riley.
Good evening. I'm here to speak about the site plan proposal for Zero East High Street, to request that City Council, I'm Rebecca Riley and I live on Caroline Avenue. I'm requesting that City Council uphold the decision made by the Planning Commission in August and to review the remaining public facilities, the widening of Caroline and Fairway Avenues, and the water and sewer lines proposed in the preliminary site plan. Caroline and Fairway are both in the floodplain, and the specific area in question has multiple road may flood signs posted. Additional impervious surface and increased traffic will go against the city's comprehensive plan objectives of protecting the river corridor and creating roadways that are safe for pedestrians and cyclists. I'd also like to remind council members of the large community concern that's been raised with regard to this proposal. I have no idea how many calls and emails you've received, but I did see the hundreds of people that came out to the August 8th Planning Commission meeting. The river is very important to our entire city, not just the people who live immediately adjacent to it, and I request that you vote to protect it from irresponsible development. Thank you for all that you do.
Thank you, Ms. Riley. Next is Anna Mendez.
Good evening. I'm Anna Mendez. I'm the Executive Director of The Haven. I want to thank City Manager Sanders for ceasing enforcement of the constitutionally dubious curfew. As I briefed the PCOB 2 months ago, the Ninth Circuit's opinion in Martin v. Boise found that prohibiting people who are experiencing homelessness, for whom no shelter beds exist, from sleeping in public spaces violates the constitutional protections against cruel and unusual punishment. I would like to remind our community that depending on the season, our Charlottesville community is short between 35 and 70 shelter beds. I would also like to reiterate the Haven's request for a city resolution indicating a willingness to proceed with exemption from local property tax. This is the next step in our ability to take legal ownership of 112 West Market Street and to proceed with desperately needed capital campaign and exploration of year-round overnight shelter at our location. Mr. Sanders commented during his very important remarks that he has received criticism of, from people experiencing homelessness directed at service providers. We have experienced that as well. And at The Haven, we very firmly know that meaningful feedback is a gift. I want to repeat that. Meaningful feedback is always a gift. We also know that despite making great strides over the last year since I was given the opportunity to be of service to our community in this role, that we still and always will have room for improvement. I look forward to hearing from Mr. Sanders regarding any feedback he has received about Haven services. I also request that the city expect this level of appreciation of feedback from any service provider you decide to fund. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is John Beadle. You have 3 minutes.
Hello, Council. I'd like to give my time to Roscoe.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Roscoe Boxley. The first thing I noticed when I came to Charlottesville, excuse me, is that where there are a lot of white people, the property value is high, appreciated. When there's not, the property value is depreciated. And by that tone, I judge every decision that I make. And I literally see that tone in everything that the city does. So I have my own nonprofit organization. I have my own ideas. I have my own understanding. And I have my own person to speak for myself and my own identity without nobody else's identity or persuasion with it. It's a shame that every time I'm released from some kind of facility, they let me know that repeating the same mistakes over and over again is insanity. But here we go again, right here, repeating the same mistakes over and over. So my attempt is to build a nonprofit organization called Pan Akibalan, because it is easy, it's not hard. All it takes is for us to work together. We have the resources, we have properties and inventories, we have banks, we have all of these things with all of these different inventories and properties that we could utilize. If we average the amount of homes that's up for foreclosure, it'll come to about $250,000 a home. As a business, probably pay about $500 to $600 a month. And you guys have these Section 8 programs that'll pay a little bit more for these people who need housing. And then we can still make some money on the back end to put back into the economy. Those areas on the outside, the Fluvannas and the greens and oranges who send their people down here, we can invest in their economy. Provide jobs for them as well as providing jobs here. If anybody want to talk to me after this, community, government, haters, we can all come up with an idea together because that's what it takes. Black, white, brown, red, and yellow, all working together to pick up these things like business opportunities, job opportunities, programs that actually help people with their psychological illnesses. And I know my time's up, but I got to say this. Homelessness and gun violence is not our problem. That is not our problem. Mental health is our problem. High cost of living is our problem. We have more problems than just homelessness. And I'm definitely not going to allow nobody to shove me away in a room, somewhere in a building. I'm too intelligent to be locked in a box. Talk to me.
Thank you, Mr. Boxley. Next, Sam Gulland.
Hey, good evening, Mayor Snook, councilors. My name is Sam Galland. I live at 123 Goodman Street. I want to speak tonight on the Zero East High Street appeal of the comp plan determination. Back in August, the Planning Commission reviewed public facilities that were requested by 7 Development and found that the 2 dead-end public roads and the parking lot in the Rivanna floodplain were not substantially in accord with the comprehensive plan. The PC's review was thorough and reasonable. It considered dozens of comments from the public, which you all also saw, and it quoted specific sections of the comprehensive plan. I encourage you to uphold the Planning Commission's decision tonight. I also realize that the applicant or the landowner will probably get the last word tonight, and I wanted to share some important background on the project. First of all, it was never a by right project. As originally proposed, it required a rezoning of the R1S land and the mixed-use corridor land over which the driveways needed to be built. So the whole purpose of the public roads was actually to circumvent the zoning ordinance. They actually had to add a traffic circle and a parking lot to kind of justify public roads when driveways would have made more sense. And it's kind of like a weird land use subsidy. But without the city approving the roads, the site plan cannot be approved. This is kind of a shortcut. I believe the Planning Commission did a good job, and again, I encourage you to uphold that finding. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gulland. Next is Jennifer King.
Good evening. I'm Jennifer King, and I'm a resident at 221 Montebello Circle. With respect to the special use permit request for 1709 JPA, I'm requesting consideration from council to reduce the impact of high-intensity density on the single-family homeowners on the residential side of Montebello Circle. Specifically, I'm asking council to increase the setback on Montebello Circle from the 25 feet in the Planning Commission proposal to at least 50 feet. Remove the delivery access and scooter parking on Montebello Circle side of the project, and increase the level of screening from S1 to S2 for 90% of the frontage on Montebello Circle. These requests were noted by city staff in their report to the Planning Commission to provide a better transition from the high-intensity density to the residential homeowners. As this project has dual frontage on both JPA and Montebello Circle, it's not unreasonable to consider creative solutions to driving the vehicular traffic to JPA rather than the narrow one-way street, which is Montebello Circle. At only 23 feet wide at the point of this project, the circle offers an opportunity for pedestrian and bike traffic, but additional vehicular traffic would seem unnecessary given the access to the property on JPA. I appreciate the Planning Commission's recommendation to remove the proposed parking spaces from Montebello Circle, but I'm wary of the delivery area, as past experience dictates that what is designed as a loading zone or delivery area is often used for parking or eventually turned into parking by the developer shortly after the project is complete. Enforcement is challenging given the city's current resources, and delivery vehicles would have substantially better access to the property on the wider JPA. I'm frustrated by the rush to approve special use permits in the JPA neighborhood for high-intensity density projects, which continue to be improved with no included affordable housing, and with affordable housing fund payments, which are consistently described by the Planning Commission and the City Council as disappointing. I ask only that you take a moment to consider changes to the request, which would reflect a modest level of concern for the existing homeowners who are being asked to absorb changes to their quality of life on behalf of the rest of the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. King. Shannon Ellis.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Shannon. You heard from my husband earlier in public comment, and I wanted to add to his comments about conditions on the downtown mall, specifically from the perspective of a woman who has no choice given where we live and work but to walk through that area every day. Living in a densely populated area requires the people there to be respectful of each other and the shared resource of public space. Cities have laws governing behavior in these spaces, like disorderly conduct, noise ordinances, public intoxication, etc., so that these areas can remain accessible, usable, and welcoming to everyone. Our city is currently deep in an experiment in abandoning enforcement of these so-called quality of life laws, and I want to share with you from my own experience what the results of the experiment are on the downtown mall. For months, in order to leave my apartment to go anywhere, I've had to walk past an unhoused man who regularly shouts sexual comments and obscene words at me, and the other women who pass him as well. Several evenings a week, there are profanity-laden, full-volume screaming fights outside our apartment windows that often include exchanged threats of violence. Individuals urinate against my building in full daylight. This is despite the opening of the bathroom at York Place that was supposed to solve that problem. I'm increasingly witnessing open-air drug use and seeing clearly high individuals acting wildly, and I step over discarded needles when I walk to the gym. All of these behaviors are illegal and could be addressed by law enforcement, but policies from the Commonwealth's attorney, the police department, and council mean that they go on unchecked right now. And this has turned what was once a friendly and welcoming environment where I felt safe walking even after dark, alone, into one that is hostile and threatening. Last Saturday, 3 nights ago, that man who often shouts at me was arrested after he violently assaulted a woman. I saw the attack. He threw her to the ground. He punched her head into the bricks until he was hauled off of her by a bystander. The police did arrest him at that point. But how is a woman to feel safe walking around downtown when the police only seem to be able to respond after you are attacked? I recognize that many of the people here tonight are advocating on behalf of the unhoused population, and that is commendable. I hope that in your efforts to help that specific population, though, you will not disregard the rights of the rest of Charlottesville's citizens to access safely and enjoy our public spaces. Basic public order laws that ensure a safe and respectful environment for everyone should be enforced. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis. So that is the 8 pre-registered speakers. We will now, let's try one person who's online. Do we have somebody online who would like to speak to us?
We have Elizabeth Stark.
Okay, Ms. Stark, you have 3 minutes.
Hi, councilors. My name's Elizabeth. I live in the Woolen Mills neighborhood in the city of Charlottesville. I wanted to say that I appreciate Sam Sanders sharing his work plan for the city earlier. Some of you may know I'm a regular volunteer as an eviction prevention advocate. I speak to people who are on the eviction docket, and I inform them of their rights as they face the eviction process. And I can tell you firsthand that Charlottesville area residents and people living in the city are really struggling to make ends meet. We know real estate prices are rapidly increasing, rents are increasing, and we really need solutions for deeply affordable housing and services. We also need to increase the number of low barrier shelters that are available to the unhoused community. I see that the work plan includes asking Pacham to accelerate the timeline for overnight shelters and also to conduct a feasibility study for additional overnight shelter services. I'd just like to echo the request of the Haven Executive Director and saying that, you know, if the Haven seems like they very much would like to move forward with this, and so I ask the city do everything they can to facilitate this trusted community partner who works with unhoused folks in trying to get this done. There's obviously a great need in our community, and I just hope that City Manager Sanders said that he didn't want to act too quickly, but I do think that this is really, it's clear that we need rapid action. I also want to say that we need supportive housing. It's a real loss to this community that the crossings 2 never happened, but this kind of supportive housing is essential to help unhoused folks become housed. That's the ultimate goal, and we can do that for our neighbors and friends. I also want to say that the city needs to implement a Marcus Alert program. People are dealing with mental health crises. We have a mandate to implement this program, and it needs to happen quickly. Folks with mental illness who are facing a mental health crisis should be able to be cared for. Finally, I just want to say that what we also need is deeply affordable housing. This is housing for people that are in the 30 to 50% AMI range. We can't rely on developers or a zoning rewrite to make sure that there's affordable housing accessible in Charlottesville. We have to make that happen ourselves. And so I, as a citizen, am really hoping that you, as the government, will get that done. I also would really like to explore the land trust model. And I think that permanently affordable housing is a wonderful option that we should explore. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Stark. So let's take somebody from in the room here. Yes, ma'am. Just tell us your name, please, and where you live.
Yeah, hi, my name is Anna. I just want to say, first of all, it's not illegal to be mentally ill or a drug user. Second of all, I wasn't gonna, oh gosh, sorry, I'm so flabbergasted. I wasn't gonna talk about this. I have this beautifully written thing. But I did want to say, as a person who suffers from severe mental illness, the only thing that is the difference maker between me being on the street and someone else is that my mom has a room in her home for me. And I just wanted to say that like out loud, because it's really important. Privilege is a difference maker when we're talking about houselessness. So I'm coming to talk about the encampment. The rhetoric around our unhoused community members is quite frankly abhorrent. I've heard disgusting subhuman language being used around the people around us that are the most vulnerable. What's going on in Charlottesville with a small vocal minority pushing an untrue narrative that villainizes a certain set of community members is happening all around the country, and I'm thinking about that when you're talking about being in Austin. Nationally, conservatives, right-wingers, and a lot of people who call themselves liberal have been pushing a narrative about our neighbors that has been picked up in a lot of news. The narrative is designed to make you think that any problem in your city could be solved by getting rid of unhoused people. It's designed to detract from all the actual reasons why things around us are getting worse. The rise of inflation, the bubble in rent costs, a pandemic economic downturn that is going to happen when 2 million people die. These rich, mostly white landowners peddling these lies would rather have people die than pay their fair share, a fair share that could ultimately help this issue. And it's not a coincidence that conservatives are dog whistling about the unhoused population when it has the demographics it does. Black and brown folks, LGBTQ youth, people disproportionately impacted by the justice system, folks in the throes of a mental health crisis, it's the most marginalized. And if you're a part of these groups, which I am a part of some, you're no stranger to this rhetoric. When I heard somebody speaking about the unhoused population and they said, "I'm afraid to touch them with my hands," I was reminded of the rhetoric used against my queer ancestors when they were in the midst of the AIDS crisis. Language in that instance and in this instance leads to a level of stigmatization that leads to structural and social violence. So what am I asking of you? I'm asking the council specifically to not be moved by this rhetoric. They want you to hear this and make drastic changes that put people in danger. They want to turn Charlottesville into a place that is only accessible to the upper echelons of society. Let these people stay in their new homes at the park. I, for one, am glad to see a place once associated with racist hate and white supremacy, now housing a community of people just trying to keep each other safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next, somebody online?
Yes, Mayor Snook, we have Zayana Bryant.
Ms. Bryant, you have 3 minutes.
Good evening. You guys know my name, and you know that I'm a Charlottesville resident. I'm speaking about two things. One, I logged onto Twitter to read the public comment, basically captioning that Molly does, and I was very disappointed and overwhelmed to see that one of our city councilors was being referred to by racial slurs, and it felt like a flashback to 2017 when I read that the question was about legality of whether or not you could cut a speaker off when they speak in that manner. And it reminded me of how Mike Signer used to claim that there was a reason why we should platform hate and why we should allow people to say horribly racist things on a public platform. And I just want to reiterate that deplatforming hate works. And so we have a responsibility to make sure that we don't give people public platforms such as public comments during meetings to spread horrible messages that galvanize white supremacists. Additionally, I'm interested in history and I study history, and so I want to remind us that there were these set of laws called Black Codes, where Black people were criminalized for being unemployed and unhoused right at the end of the Civil War. And so when we talk about the kind of relevance of this park and the spatial significance of what Market Street Park means, and also the historical narratives that are coupled with that, it's important to note that just a couple years ago, there was a 100-plus-year-old statue that was put in place to reinforce fear for Black people so that they would be very clear that this public space was not meant for them. So when folks come to the mic and they talk about who's entitled to enjoy public spaces, I want you to remember that it wasn't too long ago that people who looked like myself and looked like many of the unhoused folks on the downtown mall weren't even allowed to be in those spaces. So when we talk about legality, when we talk about right to public space, when we talk about sharing, when we talk about community, I think that it's very telling that right-wingers picked up this city council meeting, picked up this moment in Charlottesville, a place where Mike Signer wanted to call the capital of the resistance, but a place that other people saw as a capital of the Confederacy at one point. It's important for us to remember that there's a history here, and it is on us to, in these moments, act courageously, to be brave, to take a very bold stance, and to say that we're not going to allow polite white supremacy or overt, rude, negative, disrespectful white supremacy to have a space in our town, not within our policies and not within our public spaces. So when we talk about the unhoused community having the right to be where they are, I think it's important for us to remember that these people need a place to go. These people are our neighbors, they're our friends, they're people that some of us even grew up with, they're parents, they're children of someone, and so I want you to be very careful about the way that you speak about people who are in this community.
Thank you, Ms. Bryant.
To the speakers who will come up after me, I hope that you keep all of this in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person here. Yes, sir, over here.
Andrew Shelton. I actually live in the county right now, just over the line to the south. I've lived in Charlottesville my entire life, either on one side of the county line or the other. We know how that goes. I'd like y'all to consider me a bit of a counterpoint to the first speaker, who had a concern with the violent and indecent behavior on the downtown mall. People have been saying things along those lines and overplaying those concerns for my entire life. I remember back in the aughts when it was a concern about the white t-shirts and the punch in the back of the head game that was just absolutely nothing, but it was a thing that everybody freaked out about for a while. There's always stuff like that going on, and until we actually address the problem with resources for people, instead of just trying to lock everybody up again, like we've done for the last however many decades, it's not going to actually functionally change anything. So having said that, the main reason that I came here was I wanted to specifically thank City Manager Sanders for your decision to suspend the curfew following the events of the last council meeting. It really struck me as just a clearly thought out decision that was also taking a firm action to go a different way than we have tried in the past. And I am only more impressed after seeing your presentation tonight and the goals that you have. And I am very grateful for council for being obviously in support of him with his plan. And I just, I look very much forward to seeing it be put into action. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Shelton. Is somebody online?
Hello.
Yes, we have Luis Oyola.
Okay, ma'am, well, I'll get you in just a minute, okay? Who do we have online?
Luis Oyola.
All right, you have 3 minutes.
Good evening, councilors. My name is Luis Oyola. I use he, him, and I am a former resident of Charlottesville, now living in Fluvanna County. I wanted to first off echo what Zai and Anna spoke about, and most recently Andrew. Don't give into the fear-mongering. There's been a long history of using fear-mongering in Charlottesville to do heinous things about against unhoused people, low-income people, Black people. And actually, before I keep going, I should mention I am director of organizing at Legal Aid Justice Center, but I'm doing this on my own behalf. So going back to the fear-mongering, whipping up of outrage in far-right outlets, as I mentioned, it reminds me also a lot of early 2017. City Council back then fell for the both sides narrative that the fascists somehow had just as many good points as the anti-fascists. And don't make the same mistake 6 years later. I hope the short attention span of the outrage machine remains short, but I think it is safe to give an early warning based on what I've seen. Having said that, last meeting, council asked for some solutions. City manager presented some solutions tonight, and I appreciate that, but I just want to name some of my own. Number one, move resources and money to house every unhoused person in Charlottesville. I think there needs to be an explicit goal of this conversation. You have the resources, but what you need is the fire, the conviction, and the creativity. Number two, leave the lifting of the curfew as a permanent change. There is no bad use of the park late at night that isn't already illegal by other means. All the curfew is doing is leaving vulnerable people prone to arrests. And number three, engage with those living at Market Street Park without police presence. And when I say engage, is ask them what they want, ask them what they see as the solution. Any conversations about solutions to the criminalization cannot involve the criminalizers. When a big part of the solution is to stop, when a big part of the solution is to stop policing the lack of housing, police will have an inherent conflict of interest. They are the ones who surveil, they have people's records, they have everything they need to put fear into people, and so they should not be involved in the city's community engagement. The press conference, for example, last Thursday, it could have been an announcement from the city manager about all of these plans. And it could have been an announcement about funds for housing people. It could have been an announcement of outreach efforts to ensure the health and safety of those sleeping outside. without involving the threat of arrest. Instead, it was entirely centered on police and constructing a police narrative that didn't move forward actual solutions. So do engagement that opens the doors to those most impacted.
Thank you, Mr. Ayala. Thank you.
And if the police, sorry.
Okay. Now, ma'am, I'm sorry. I had a little confusion there.
Good afternoon. I am homeless too. I know because the tent is set up around the park and everything, you could tell they are homeless. I have a van. I had to buy another van to stay in. I'm 73 years old. And you got to go somewhere to use the bathroom or change clothes. If it ain't open, you got to do it in the car. There's people who are homeless, are ashamed. They go downtown and blend in with the people who are not homeless. That I can't help I'm homeless. I'm gonna let you know I am homeless. I don't try to blend in with people downtown all around, and people look at you like, who are you? We ain't nothing. It just, you don't know whether to speak to them or put your head down. This is all I got to say. And then when you apply for apartment, you got a voucher or whatever you supposed to have, or voucher. Oh, you can't afford this, which I can't. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next person online.
We have John Hosick.
Mr. Hosick, you have 3 minutes.
Good evening. First of all, I want to commend you for the action in August to increase the capacity of the Ridge Street Salvation Army. I think that's an appropriate first step towards a medium-term solution. I'm mainly talking about the zoning ordinance. I came to the conclusion that many people still do not appreciate the extent of what's going on. For example, one member of the public mentioned that official notifications were the first they heard of the rezone. Tonight, I'm speaking directly to the public. This isn't a rezoning. It's a de facto issuance of building permits for every plot up to the maximum allowed per plan. Implicit in the plan is a concept that public process is allowed prior to adoption, but not after adoption and prior to individual permit issuance. Thus, if your neighbour sells a house and the developer acquires it, they get an automatic building permit up to the maximum allowed. For example, 3-story apartment, minimal setbacks, no off-street parking, etc. This is why I call it a mass building permit issuance. Members of the public, if you have an issue with potentially having an apartment next door to your single-family home, this is your last call. Further, all transactions going forward will be under the shadow of this prospect that the street may be reconstructed with apartments. Most intelligent buyers will walk away to the county where such rezoning has no chance of being adopted. And once the house is transacted, you may not even meet your new neighbour. The first you may hear might be the sounds of heavy machinery reducing the neighbour's house to rubble and having it carried off in trucks. In terms of our concerns, we continue to be frustrated by the lack of transparency with what may be allowed. The consultants were paid to produce graphics showing future streetscapes, so why do we rely on an anonymous 11-year-old to produce graphics, such as 3-story apartments adjacent to single-level homes? No one really knows the future rate of change. Knowledge from other jurisdictions is that streets typically do not change for a while, but once they start, they change rapidly. There's little latent demand on a street like mine, 1 house out of 19. However, once one resident sells, the fear becomes of a cascading effect and a run for the exit. Please understand that this fear is present as of now. We look with concern at what the spring 2024 transaction season will bring. We can identify, based on a few clues, who might be first. Should we all sell? As you know, today is a very bad time for selling due to the new mortgage rates when you have a new transaction. I'd also like to draw attention to property tax valuations arising out of the process. Apparently, the assessor has estimated that land valuations may jump 50%. The city needs to come out and explain very clearly what these property tax increases are likely to look like and whether there will be a compensatory tax reduction as there was during the previous run-up in 2006 to 2009. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hosick. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, I'm Ange Khan. I'm the Director of Housing Programs at The Haven, but I'll be speaking in my individual capacity. I am sickened, outraged, and just actually not quite surprised at the fear that folks who have an enormous amount of privilege to walk freely on the streets without being harassed or viewed as inhuman have when they're speaking to you all, right? I work with folks who are unhoused, who are experiencing homelessness every day, all day, sometimes until 7 o'clock at night. But I have not been shouted at, screamed at. Violence has not been thrown upon me as some may have you believe. Speaking about their experience or what fears they want to put out into the community about those who are experiencing homelessness. I think we really need to take a deeper look into the reasons why people are feeling the need to have so much say in where someone rests or how they experience life in public when they don't have homes to experience those things privately, right? So if you think about this, the majority of us in this room have a place to go at night. We have a place to de-stress. We have a place we have support systems where we can call and say, oh my gosh, you know what, X, Y, and Z happened today, you know, I'm really upset about this, blah, 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 right? Right, and you can do that in the comfort of your own home, right? Where you have lights, water, you have a refrigerator, right? You have family, supportive family. If something happens to you, you might have somebody to call to say, hey, my water bill's due, can you help me out, whatever. You have that support mechanism, right? And you have that private place to be, to experience life. Folks are experiencing life in public right now, right? So you also have to think about that. If you're not advocating for someone to have a home, then shut the hell up. That's it. You're not advocating for they're gonna harm me. Nobody's bothering you, sis. Nobody's bothering you. Stop with that fear-mongering shit.
Thank you, Ms. Khan. We've now reached the end of our designated 16 folks for community matters at the beginning of the meeting. There will be another opportunity for public comment at the end of the meeting. And we've got 3 items I have to get to before that will take place. So the next item on the agenda is a resolution to approve a special use permit at 1709 Jefferson Park Avenue. Mr. Alfley.
Mayor, City Council, Matt Alfley, City Planner, Neighborhood Development Services. Tonight you'll be taking 2 actions as it relates to a proposed development at 1709 Jefferson Park Avenue. Mitchell Matthews and Associates, representing the owner, Neighborhood Investments LLC, is proposing an SUP at 1709 JPA for increased density, additional height, modifying yard requirements, and modifying on-site parking requirements. The applicant is proposing to redevelop the property and replace the existing 8-unit multifamily apartment building with a 27-unit multifamily apartment building. The SUP requests include increased density from 21 dwelling units per acre, increased height from 45 feet to 70 feet, a building setback of 18 feet along Jefferson Park Avenue, a building setback of 25 feet along Montebello Circle, side yard setbacks of 5 feet, reduce the minimum distance between the facade of the building and the boundary of any low-density residential districts to 58 feet, modification to yard screening requirements, and reduction of on-site parking. In addition to the SUP, the applicant is also requesting approval of a critical slope waiver. The Planning Commission held a joint public hearing with City Council on September 12, 2023 on this matter. In addition to the public hearing, the Planning Commission, in its role of entrance corridor review board, also deliberated on the proposal. The Planning Commission and City Council had the following comments and concerns. How will the overall height of the building impact the surrounding neighborhood? How will they achieve their affordability requirement? And how will the proposed development interact with the frontage along Montebello Circle? Planning Commission reacted favorably to the request with the SUP and critical slope waiver applications. They believed a development of this size and density is appropriate at this location. They, along with City Council, were concerned with the level of affordability, but understood the applicant was meeting the minimum requirements under the current Affordable Housing Code section. In addition, there was a long conversation on how the development should interact with Montebello Circle and transition to that side of the neighborhood. Prior to providing a recommendation of approval, the Planning Commission adjusted a number of the conditions presented by staff in order to create a front yard for the development along Montebello Circle. These changes are in the resolution before you tonight. Planning Commission voted 6-0 to recommend approval of both the SUP request and the critical slope request. This concludes staff's presentation. The applicant is also present and would like to make a statement.
All right. First of all, anybody have any questions for Mr. Alfoy before we get to the presentation?
One question, could you just remind me what the current zoning is and what is allowed in terms of height?
So it's R3, and the maximum height is 45 feet. This came up to a lot in Planning Commission because it's double frontage and because you have such a difference in elevation between Montebello Circle and JPA. That 45 feet would actually look a lot higher on the Montebello side than on the JPA side by right.
Certainly. And what they're proposing is 8 stories. And then I believe granted it's not finished yet, but I think under our draft zoning, at least what is in our published materials in the interactive map, this would be CX5, which would be up to 7 stories with an affordable height bonus.
It would, and I would point out there's still some issues because of that grade change. That you could get a taller building than you really would want on the Montebello side than you would on the JPA side because of that grade change and double frontage, even under the proposed zoning.
And one last question: what was their is their proffer the same as what was in front of the Planning Commission last time in terms of the affordable housing contribution?
So this is an SUP, so there's not a proffer. You would only get that with rezoning. They're following 3412. Which would be either to provide the units, there's the calculation based on your FAR. In the application material, they do a preliminary one. Of course, we never know the final because you don't have detailed architectural plans until you get to your building permit, but it would be following section 3412.
So, layman's term, following our existing policy as opposed to anything based on the draft inclusionary zoning policy?
Correct, following what's in the code now.
Thank you.
And did I see the number of $112,000 or something like that floating around in here as a payment in lieu figure? Is that?
I don't want to.
I know it's just going to be a guesstimate in any event, but I thought I was trying to get some sense of what the figure was. I thought I remembered it 112 or something.
That's my memory too.
Yeah. Okay. That's fine, Mr. Allen. We seem to have a collegial memory. Any other questions for him?
Yeah. Good evening. Thanks for being here. Could you help me remember? So there's one parking spot that's being dedicated on the Montebello Circle side?
No parking. It'd be delivery drop-offs and pickups. So Planning Commission altered a lot of the conditions. Staff's original condition suggestion was no parking on Montebello, to have a little bit more of a screen. Planning Commission wanted to activate Montebello and treat it more as a true front yard than the back of the property. And what they came up with was allowing lighter screen, the S1 screening, which is a lot more transparent, and allowing for your micro-mobility parking and allowing for deliveries at that location.
So what would that look like? Is basically just like a low part of the sidewalk, or?
It would take, because it came out of Planning Commission, I'm sure the applicant hasn't had a chance to design it, they would need to kind of come back with that when they submitted a site plan, basically take those parameters and present something that would meet those conditions.
And the screening type is an S1 now?
Correct. S1 is, and that's very kind of loose, so it creates more of a front yard. S2 is a little thicker. S3 is almost opaque, so you would actually kind of cut off even that interaction with.
So there's S1 across, I guess,
It was like
that front yard, the Montebello Circle front
it
yard?
was Montebello, but it wasn't full. I believe it was 50%. It should be in the condition.
Okay, I can find it. Thank you.
So could I just get your reaction? I mean, the three specific things that Ms. King had mentioned. One is increasing the setback on Montebello to 50 feet from 25 feet. Was that I don't remember that coming up at the Planning Commission meeting.
That didn't really come up just because it is a narrow lot. It was trying to take what the applicant had proposed, but making it a little more screened and to try to help that transition. Staff wasn't necessarily pushing the building closer to to JPA. I think that's following more what the code would say. This.
What's following more of the code?
What Ms. King was bringing up, following, because there is a large, in the current code, there's a large setback between your facade and low-density residential. As part of the SUP application, the applicant was reducing that. Staff wasn't suggesting increasing it. They were just taking what the applicant was proposing, but screening it heavier and trying to get more of the activity down on JPA and off Montebello.
So if we're talking a setback here, are we talking about the distance from basically the sidewalk to the front facade of the building?
You have two requirements here. You have your typical setback, which would be from your property line to where you could start your building, which is your typical quote-unquote front yard. That determines your front yard. There are other places in the code where you have additional requirements outside of, you have to meet your setback, but there's also, when you're transitioning from higher density to lower density, there's this requirement between the zoning district, so where the R2 starts, and the facade of your building. So it's not really tied to your property line, but it's tied to the facade of where you place your building and where that low-density residential district starts.
And that's across the street?
And that's on, yeah, correct, that's on the west side of Montebello Circle is where
So
R2
the
starts.
50-foot setback would be from the opposite side of the street, which they were saying is 23 feet wide?
Correct, so you would go from the west side of Montebello where the R2U district starts to where the facade, where they could put the facade of the building.
And how, I don't remember, when I was there looking, I wasn't thinking about this point in particular. How far is the facade away from that side of the street?
From where the R2U starts?
Well, I'm thinking the R2 use is 23 feet. I mean, the street's 23 feet.
Correct.
So if we're talking about a 50-foot setback from the R2, it would have to be 27 feet into the lot. Am I right?
I want to get the right number here. So you're looking at the yard requirement, altering on the Montebello Circle yard requirement side to 25 feet. So that's 25 feet from the property line to where you can't build within that 25 feet from the property line to the start of the building. Then the other requirement is the facade reduce the minimum distance between the facade of the multifamily building and the boundary of the low-density residential district to 58 feet. So where their building would be within their 25-foot setback but it would be 58 feet away from the start of the R2U district.
Okay, 58 feet, so that would be, that would get you to 35, if the street's 23 feet wide, that would get you to 53 feet? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's variable width too as you move across the property. That property line kind of slopes a little bit.
35 feet, 35.
So are you saying that when Ms. King spoke about changing the setbacks to the 50 feet, you indicated that you had addressed that consideration, not by changing that, but by doing some additional landscaping? Did I misunderstand what you said?
So when the application first came in, the distance is 75 feet in code. So they're asking for two adjustments. They're asking to adjust the yard setback to 25 feet.
Yes.
And they're asking to adjust this buffer between low-density residential and the facade from 75 to 58.
Correct.
What I was saying is staff did not recommend changing. They went along with what the applicant was saying because 75 feet would push them pretty far back to the JPA side. So instead of, in our recommendations to Planning Commission, instead of changing the requested 58 feet, we suggested keeping the 58 feet, but having a denser screening to help with the transition.
Okay. And how are you going to do your denser screening? With landscaping or?
So staff's recommendation was 90% at R3 screening.
Okay.
Planning Commission's recommendation to this body is S1 screening.
All right.
For 50%.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Alfrey? You ready for the applicant?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Alfrey.
Thanks, Matt. My name's Kevin Riddle. I work with Mitchell Matthews Architects. We're working on behalf of the owner, Neighborhood Investments. Richard Spurzum, who operates that business and owns the building, is here for any questions you have. We also have Campbell Bolton with Timmons Group, and he's been working on the civil side of things. So any questions you may have about site issues, he can cover. I just want to speak briefly that the project's been through a fair amount of meeting and review already. We had a community meeting on site. We've had a couple of meetings with the Planning Commission, and it's come a long way. We're proposing a building with materials, mostly masonry, that will be durable, long-lasting, come at some expense. But as you might, you can think of the JPA Avenue and some of the buildings that are along this side of the avenue right now. You can see what results sometimes when buildings are constructed with materials that don't have that kind of longevity and haven't been maintained as well. So this would be a project that's here for the long haul. What we're proposing would take the project from about 24 bedrooms now to between 65 and 66 bedrooms. So there would be almost a threefold increase in the number of tenants on the property. And we feel like the density request in this location is, it has some real promise to help take pressures off elsewhere in the city. Just to talk about a few things that you guys were just discussing. I think Matt explained it pretty well, but yes, on the Montebello side, what we'd normally be looking at if we were determining the front yard there is an average of adjacent properties. And that average we determined would be about 33 feet off of the property boundary. We're proposing to reduce it to 25 feet. In addition, there is also this buffer zone between this property and a lower density residential like the R2 across the street. And that would be, by right, 75 feet. We're proposing to bring that down to 58 feet when you include the width of the street and the width of the front yard we're proposing there. Regarding the screening, I think it was the Planning Commission's position that when they looked at illustrations that we showed them, some of you might recall those if y'all were there at that meeting a month ago. When they looked at our illustrations on the Montebello side, I think they agreed that Overly planting that side would make it so thick with vegetation that it would practically obscure the building and its residents from the street. And we felt like it, and I think they agreed, that it would make for a better project if there were some eyes on the street, while also including some generous plantings, a lot more than what's there now. The city's current expectation for tree canopy on a new project is 10%. Ours should be coming in at something like 17 or 18%. And what's there now basically are 2 small crepe myrtle trees. We're proposing street trees both on JPA and on Montebello. We think that'll create a big improvement, especially too when you consider that we're going to make the building and the site altogether a lot more accessible than it is now. If you've driven or walked by there recently, you'll notice there's a big steep apron of paving all along the JPA side. There's 2 curb cuts. There's no room for any sort of public parking on the street there. So by reducing down to 1 curb cut and a discrete entrance into an under building parking, the city would be able to recapture a couple of spaces on the street too, which we think could help. I think I'll leave it there. Matt gave you a very good outline of the project, pretty thorough. We're happy to take any questions that you might have.
Yeah, I walked around the site this afternoon on the way coming into here, and it is an incredibly steep hill. I didn't realize there were steps around one side, so I kind of did a billy goat deal and went up the grass side and then came down the steps. It's what do you know the purpose of those steel columns or beams coming out? Is that to keep the building from rolling over? It's very strange.
I believe there had been a deck there of some kind. Is that right, Richard? Yeah, there had been some sort of parking deck previously. I've never seen images from when that was there, but basically structure was left behind after whatever sort of slab or paving had been on top of it.
Yeah. And then just up Montebello, I guess, whatever, there's another building that's going to be, I think, at least as high as what y'all are proposing, and really horrible looking. No offense to whoever's building it is. And the building that's there now is horrible looking. So my own view is that when this is, assuming we vote for this to go forward, the end product's going to be much better than from every stance than what's there now. The one thing I will say, and maybe there's nothing we can do about it at this point, and I know that you guys have got to make your project pencil. We would love to see more housing, affordable housing in this. $100,000 is really not a lot, but by the current code and the rules that we have now, and also because I think this is a worthwhile project, I plan to vote for it.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in. I definitely would like to see more affordability in this, but I think just for the residents of the hearing, but maybe those who might be listening, if you can just maybe tick off some of the things that you all have done to try to address their concerns.
You mean like Ms. King, who was talking earlier, the neighbor across the street, specifically about this project?
Yes, and not you can certainly mention that, but I'm just talking about in general from when you first had this project and you started getting comments from the public. I know it's been modified over, I don't know exactly when it started, but at least over the past several months.
Yeah, right. Well, some of the things that we tried to address when we had our first meeting with staff, we had originally had 4 parking spaces on Montebello. They asked, because it's a one-way street, if we could reduce those down a bit so that we would have angled parking. You might have remembered that from an image we showed recently, so that people coming onto the circle would have to back into the space. The reason being, it's perceived as safer if you're pulling out to not have to back out into that one-way street and rather pull out forward. Further, though, in our last meeting with the Planning Commission, we recognized that, and thanks to Matt's comments and his staff's comments as well, that there was some wariness of having the parking there at all. But what we did want to preserve, and we still think it's important, is to have some manner of pull-off space for deliveries there, because On the JPA side, it's going to be, there's really not a dedicated place for that. And we feared that that could cause some traffic issues on JPA that could be quite significant, have safety implications. We thought on the Montebello Circle that might be a good location for an occasional van to pull off to make deliveries. We increased the proposal for tree canopy and plantings over what we had first envisioned on the site. We also have tried to work a good bit with the step backs. You know, for those of you unfamiliar, sometimes as buildings go up, when you get to higher stories, it can be desirable to pull the facade of the building in if that will help to reduce an impression of sheer height. Sometimes that can help too with reducing shadows when that's important. And we've done our best on the top story of the building to pull it in, especially on the Montebello side. It's important to consider that it's 3 stories, although the building's a little bit submerged, but it's about 3 stories up with a brick facade on the Montebello side. That's 25 feet off the property boundary, but then when you get to the 4th story, it steps back an additional 14 feet. And it's also clad in a different material, again, to help it create the impression that it's more like a 3.5-story building than a 4-story building on the Montebello side. Matt touched on this, but with the zoning draft to come, there is going to be the potential for somebody exploring development on this site to use what's called a module, or just a different ground plane on the Montebello side than on the JPA side. So what that would mean is that you could go to 7 stories with a bonus on the JPA side according to its grade at street. But then you could also go to 7 stories on the Montebello side, right? And about, you know, it's theoretically, it's simplifying it a little bit, but you could go 7 stories about halfway into the site off of Montebello. And when we were assessing the potential for a stepped building, which we did, we just thought it made a little more sense to have more of that height over on the JPA side, a very wide boulevard, than to shift it over to the Montebello side, which is a smaller circle. And so those are some of the things that we've explored as we were designing this. I hope that answers the question.
I don't have any questions, maybe just comments. Maybe I'll just wait till we get to the discussion.
How do you perceive this is going to impact the traffic on the Montebello side? And also, when Ms. King was speaking about the delivery points becoming parking when they are supposed to be delivery points, what's your response?
Right. Well, one thing I would say is what might the impact be? Well, currently on the Montebello side, there's room for 6, almost 7 cars, depending on how people park up there. It's not really striped off clearly. And so those spaces would be gone. And if you travel down Montebello, you'll notice on that side of the street, the majority of the properties on that kind of east side, they have parking that covers almost the entire front yard of those buildings. And so we see that as another reason why our request for a slightly reduced yard could be beneficial in this case. While the building is getting a little closer to the street than by right would allow right now, we're also taking a lot of that parking away and replacing it with trees and plantings. As far as the deliveries go, I think we could work with the city. It's stipulated within the SUP request that we would have a sort of a traffic master planning exercise with the city that would be a part of site plan approval. And we could work with them on ways to ensure that the spaces don't become, or the pull-off space doesn't become a default parking area for residents.
That's her concern, that's what's going to happen.
Right.
And I don't hear you saying it's not going to happen because we're going to do A, B, C, and D. I don't hear that. I'm not saying that is not your intent.
Right.
But that is not what I hear.
Right.
I hear you talking about crepe myrtles, and I like crepe myrtles, okay?
Sure.
So I don't know what you're going to put in place of them, that are going to be more aesthetically pleasing. That's why I asked you about the landscaping and what you were going to do. You're putting a building that on one side is residential and on the other side is just JPA, whatever you want to call that. The University of Virginia is saying that at some point in the next 3 to 5 years, they're going to be going to on-ground housing for first and second year students. My concern also is, at that point, what happens to your building? Because right now, if the building goes up, it may address certain concerns, but down the road, your occupancy may change, and I don't hear anything as it relates to affordability. Because I don't imagine that you would want your building to be vacant, or that you would want the numbers of persons living in the building to go down. So I don't know what impact your building is going to have in approximately 3 to 5 years if we have more people living on grounds than off grounds. Right now, you're addressing a current concern, but long term, is that concern going to be the same?
Well, I can't predict the market. I'm not in the business day to day of operating properties like these. Richard might want to speak to that. I guess my assumption would be that that housing is generally, kind of underserved here in the city. And this is an area where you do have a lot of demand for housing, and I would expect that it would remain robust. I would expect that while UVA is making some, earnest efforts to have more housing for students on campus, I would guess they're going to be, their admissions would be going up as well. And so there is, I would think this would be a good, solid residential project for years and years to come.
And not to sidetrack us too much, but I think something a lot of people don't realize about UVA's on-campus housing plans is that they're going to be requiring first and second years to live on campus, but they're doing that by replacing the on-campus upper graduate housing. So it's not actually even a net increase in the amount of UVA students not living on campus. It's just kind of shifting it around, at least under the current proposal, but that's a whole nother thing.
I'm curious about one thing. I'm looking at the conditions, and I don't see, maybe I'm missing something, I don't see any condition on the report from staff from the Planning Commission meeting that limits the height on Montebello. Is there something?
No, I don't think there is, or there doesn't really need to be technically, because we are proposing a certain height from an average grade plane. And so based on where the average grade falls on the site, and it's quite steep, right? So that comes about halfway up the site. So we're setting it at 70 feet, which basically allows for the building at the number of stories that we're proposing. And so the building, it really couldn't get taller than what we propose on Montebello, because then it would be going over 70 feet tall.
I mean, I am certainly not an expert on the drawings, but the one that I'm seeing on page 61 of the packet shows that the building would be 95 feet above JPA, and says 70 feet above the average grade on site. And then that 70 feet above the average grade on site works out to 40 feet above Montebello. Is that?
Yeah, right,
Okay.
right. And so that grade on site, it basically carries through, and it affects both street frontages.
I guess my question, and I'll direct this to perhaps Mr. Freeze or Mr. Alfleys, are you all satisfied that they can't, under this design, under these restrictions, that they can't go above 40 feet on Montebello?
Staff would be. The other thing too, this is, the SUP is tied to their application. So if they tried to submit something that did not follow the application, especially the elevations, it would not be in line with the SUP granted.
Okay. I was sitting there looking for, surely there's something that says a limit on Montebello, but I guess I have to infer it from 3 other numbers.
Right.
I would be interested if it's okay for the owner, if he's willing to speak up at some point and talk a little bit more about the housing, the affordability piece, if he's willing to. I'm sure there are good reasons for, good evening.
Sure. City councilors, city manager, I'm Richard Spurzum, Neighborhood Properties. I just want to take a second and introduce myself, because I'm not like the big out-of-town developers who have come to Charlottesville and built these huge student housing projects on West Main, and the out-of-town developers that are currently looking at building huge student projects on JPA. For over 42 years, ever since Blake Caravati and I bought a rundown house in Belmont together for $15,000 in 1980, I've been working every day to improve the housing stock in the city of Charlottesville. Affordable housing has always been a large part of my business. I developed 146 townhouses at Ridgecrest and Reeves Park that were sold to first-time home buyers years ago for between $65,000 and $79,500. All these townhouses are now worth upwards of $300,000 or more, which has given hundreds of folks a lot of equity in their house. In addition, I've renovated and built numerous houses that have sold to first-time home buyers. And a substantial part of Neighborhood Properties rentals has always included units that have rented to people with housing vouchers, Region 10 clients, and other folks looking for affordable rents. I have invested my time and effort in this city, unlike these big out-of-town developers, and I'll be doing so, and my family will be doing so for decades to come. The proposed plan for 1709 JPA is to tear down an aging and monolithic 1970s structure and replace it with a beautiful apartment building with appropriate massing, with balconies, and with a mix of quality materials, predominantly brick. More importantly, as someone pointed out who's been to the site, we will be demolishing the current parking lot that takes up the whole front yard of the building, along with 2 curb cuts on JPA. Right now, pedestrians who walk down JPA face a huge slab of concrete with cars parked at such a steep incline that it looks like they're going to roll into the street. The 1709 JPA site is already almost totally taken up by building and parking. And as someone pointed out, the only 2 trees on the site are 2 crepe myrtles, which I love too, but they're small trees, they're not large trees. So because of the small site and very steep topography, this will be an incredibly expensive redevelopment, particularly because we'll be throwing away a functionally but ugly apartment building that is currently generating substantial rental income. The 1709 JPA site should not be compared to the recent student developments approved or proposed on JPA. The Aspen Heights site at 2005 JPA and the Subtext site at the Woodrow Apartments are many times larger in size, which allows for greater economies of scale when developing the site and constructing the building. Both of these projects require the removal of mature trees and also historic houses. 1709 JPA is different because it is already fully developed. So our proposal is to replace the site with an excess of paving and an obsolete building with a beautiful project that relates to the streetscape at JPA. This will generate millions of dollars in increased real estate assessment for the city. And the increased number of bedrooms will help meet the demand of UVA students for apartments adjacent to UVA. So as far as affordable housing, I'm happy for this project to contribute its fair share to the city's affordable housing initiative. we have offered exactly what the city ordinance calls for and what other developers have paid in the past. This includes when I developed the 62-bedroom 1725 JPA project in the same block 4 years ago. I paid the prescribed affordable housing contribution. This is just a matter of fairness. Does the city expect some developers to pay more than the prescribed amount? I have outlined why some big out-of-town student housing developers might be willing to offer a greater contribution in order to get their highly contentious projects approved. I cannot address why these developers were willing or able to offer more. It well could be because they have so much tied up in the costs of trying to purchase a property in Charlottesville and to do all the planning, architectural, and engineering work that they felt they had to pay whatever was necessary to get their project over the finish line. My situation is different. I already own the property and it is already throwing off substantial rental income. I don't need to do anything. I can leave the property just as it is for another 20 or more years. However, I would like to redevelop it into a better property, one that uses the land more efficiently and provides improved housing close to UVA. But we'll not be able to do this if the city requires a contribution like is suggested in the new but on-pass zoning code, which would be 8 to 10 times greater than what the current enforced fee in lieu is. I respectfully ask City Council to follow the unanimous recommendation of its Planning Commission and give this small, well-designed redevelopment project the green light. So, thanks for hearing me on that, and if you have specific questions, I'll
thank you.
Try to address them.
I don't think so. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, would you entertain a motion at this time?
I would like further discuss, or go ahead.
Well, we can always have
Yeah,
further
yeah,
discussion
correct.
after the motion. Why don't you make the
Okay.
motion and see where we go?
Okay, I move to approve the resolution for application SP 23-00005, granting a special use permit for property located at 1709 Jefferson Park Avenue, city tax map parcels 160010100 with conditions.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Shall we have discussion?
Yeah, I'll just say, I don't say any of this with ill will, because I think we're in a confusing area of where we are with our zoning. And this is not new, but I'll raise my concern again. My concern is when we're in an interim period now, and we're approving projects based on the logic of our future land use map, draft zoning, and comprehensive plan, but the developer gets to throw out the parts they don't like, namely the increased affordable housing contribution, as well as all the design requirements. If that is the standard they want to go by, I think we need to strictly evaluate this project based on our existing zoning. And I also think as a policy matter, we should be clear with ourselves and the public. Approving new student housing without an affordable housing contribution will never trickle down to benefit, certainly not the issues we heard tonight in terms of homelessness, but not even a family making $60,000 a year. So we should just be clear, it's not going to make any effort move there to solve that issue ever. And I would say if we're going to evaluate this, as I think we should, strictly under our current zoning, I don't think that this is, in terms of height and density, appropriate with our current zoning. And I think we need to set a higher standard for ourselves and say, meet that higher standard, or if you want us to evaluate you based on our future zoning and future land use map, but you're not going to meet all the requirements, well, wait until it takes effect. But if I'm evaluating it strictly under our zoning now, I don't see how the height or density is in line with it, and so I will plan to vote against it.
So, well said, Michael. So, just a comment about the contribution. So that can, the money that we put towards, like, Piedmont or Habitat or any of those type of programs where we pull from a pool and this and other will go towards it. I don't understand how that would not help those families that's 0 to 30 or 30 to 50 AMI.
Well, I mean, you're talking about a contribution that, as was mentioned, is 10 times smaller than what it would be. So in terms of the direct contribution from the developer, substantially less. If you're talking about tax revenue, I mean, there certainly will be an increased tax revenue. That delta is probably not enormous going from the current number of units to what's proposed. But certainly increased tax revenue has some small diffuse benefit, but the tax revenue from this property, I don't think would even get one unit constructed if you're going to isolate it. Right. The delta of the increase in the tax revenue.
I'm sorry that I didn't suss through all this before the meeting, but help me, Michael, in terms of, you're saying that they're taking advantage, not in a negative sense, but they're sort of anticipating the fact that we're going to be, the new zoning work we're doing, and specifically in this area, this location, allows them to have the sort of building that they're planning to build?
Yes, I think the justification for approval is not our current zoning. It's the fact that there's a future land use map and draft zoning, which is clearly indicating that we're gonna likely to move in that direction in this corridor, but that's not our current zoning there.
Right, but we're not asking for a change in zoning, right? We're asking for...
SUP is a change in zoning.
Okay, all right, sorry.
I'm curious about one thing, the provision that on the Montebello side, there would be like a delivery lane and a place for, I think somebody, I don't remember what the term was, but micro-mobility entry.
So those darn scooters.
Yeah. I'm looking at the diagrams or the drawings we've got of the sort of the aerial view of things. And on page 100 in particular, there's a very pretty drawing of what it would look as an aerial view, which shows the three spots that we're apparently now eliminating. And I'm wondering, did the Planning Commission or anybody else, did we see a design for what that front is now going to look like? Has that been submitted?
I don't think so.
City Council, no. So the application hasn't changed from what was submitted that Planning Commission reviewed. It's just their suggested conditions to you remove some of those things that are shown in the application. The applicant wouldn't address that until this either moves forward or not.
I'm trying to visualize what the changes that the neighborhood is what the neighbors are asking for. I'm trying to visualize what it would look like in some of these drawings, and I guess as I've said before, I'm not very good at seeing things that aren't there yet.
If I could quickly address it.
Yeah.
Something that might be some assurance here is that even if this project were to be approved at council, it still has to go through the ERB process. And so that's...
Even if it's on the Montebello side?
Well, but I guess the whole site is considered to be in the corridor. Now, it is true, something on the Montebello side may not have quite the kind of pressures on it, design-wise, that the JPA side would, but if we're following this as a condition of its approval, that we provide for this kind of storage of small vehicles, that we have a pull-off area for vans, we maintain half of the site or more with an S1 screening, then we're going to follow all of those things. And if there's one other thing I could just clarify real quickly, we haven't meant to cause confusion in the way we've presented the project in general with our request. It's not meant to be a project that is counting on the draft ordinance or what the comp plan envisions going through as it's drafted. It really is just an application under the current enforced zoning, which allows an owner to request a special use permit based on all of the grounds we have here. Otherwise, it wouldn't even be in front of you. We can request height in an R3 up to 101 feet. We can request reduced yards, reduced parking. And so really it is first and foremost a project that we're applying for under the current zoning with SUP. When we mention the draft ordinance, it's really just us kind of doing what we feel is our due diligence, which is to describe how we think that while it fits with the current ordinance with an SUP, it's also going to be in general compatible with the new ordinance. So it wouldn't be out of step all of a sudden with it, with an ordinance getting passed, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, yeah.
So I'm just trying to get a sense of whether I agree with the neighbors and their concerns. And the first thought I had was, my first thought was that if we take out the micro-mobility access from Montebello, you're basically saying that everybody who's got a bicycle or a scooter has got to come down to JPA. Is that?
Well, with a scooter, that could be the case. I mean, we haven't looked at it in detail.
Or an e-bike or whatever.
Yeah, with a regular bicycle, we're actually going to plan to have ample storage on site. It would, and not like within the apartments.
At each entrance?
Well, in the case of JPA, there is room down at, we have a lobby area. We also have some storage areas there that are a part of the parking level. We also plan to have some storage areas that are up kind of within the building. And so it's true, those bikes would have to be sort of rolled out and come downstairs. But long story short, we're going to do everything that's required to have the bicycle storage that's necessary.
I guess what I'm really thinking is that as a general proposition, if we don't have a micro-mobility entrance on Montebello and the only micro-mobility entrance is to be on JPA, then we're telling everybody on an e-bike that they've got to come down on the most intensely traveled road in the area rather than going up to a place that's probably a whole lot safer for them.
Yes.
But then you don't want the bikes to be left like people, these
Well, that's right.
scooters.
That's certainly a point, yeah.
But I don't think we should kill this project because of scooters.
Well, I'm just trying to figure out whether the concerns that the neighbors have raised move me in one way or another.
I mean, aren't we in newer developments coming up with corrals or whatever the term is for housing these things?
Right. And I'm sorry I don't have kind of better, more specific answers to this. The PC meeting was only a few weeks ago, so we haven't had a chance to explore it. But we agree that it's a promising idea, and that demand, in particular, we think the tenants that will be in this building could be somewhat high.
Yeah, so I think, Councilor Payne, maybe I'm misunderstanding what you're saying, but I don't see this as them sort of trying to take advantage of the future code and not contribute to the affordable housing, the IZ piece. I mean, to his point, they're basically, taking the code as it is now and working within those parameters, but maybe I'm missing something.
Yes, but special use permits are not a guarantee or allowed by right. It is within the parameters of us to make a decision. I think part of the criteria for whether approving an SUP is appropriate is based on the current zoning, what the density and height in that area is, and I don't see under our current zoning it being appropriate.
Well, there are buildings all along that area which are the same density or more. I mean, that's one of the things I've been the most struck by with these conversations about JPA in that area, is how many of these buildings already exist. And they've clearly been built over a number of years without any kind of thoughtfulness to them. So to me, this is, if we want housing, this is a good kind of housing to get.
Again, I disagree, and I think we have to have higher standards for ourselves, but.
Indeed.
I have one other question relating to this setback issue, which I'm obviously not quite understanding. There are two different conditions in what the Planning Commission has set out that affect the Montebello Circle setback. One is the yard setback requirement of 25 feet, and the other is the minimum distance between the facade of the building and the boundary of the low-density residential district on the other side of the street at 58 feet. And if we assume that the road is 23 feet wide, as was represented to us, then it seems to me that the second condition basically insists on a 35-foot setback.
I think the actual road might be 23 feet as she measured it. As we all know, city roads usually don't take up their full right-of-way. So, you know, the right-of-way of the road, you know, obviously goes into her front yard a little bit. So that's where I think you're...
Well, I mean, I guess putting paragraph 4 and paragraph 7 together, it seems to me that paragraph 4 at 25 feet doesn't add anything, that paragraph 7 basically creates a 35-foot setback when added to the 23-foot width of the road.
Right, but actually, if I could maybe try to clarify that somewhat. Actually, the 58 feet we arrived at based on the 25 feet. And what I did was I simply took our GIS mapping and I measured from, once I pulled the building face 25 feet from this site's property boundary, and I measured from that building face to the property boundary on the other side of the street, and I came up with roughly 58 feet. But it actually is a good point you're bringing up, because the GIS mapping can be a little inaccurate. And so...
I mean, my guess is the right-of-way's got to be 50 feet. It could be...
Yeah.
It's a 30-foot
The survey that we have says it's a 30-foot right-of-way.
So 55.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm getting at is that what might be helpful to do, you know, if you see the merit of the project having the front yard that we proposed and its reduction, there might be merit in having that 58 feet be one that is dependent on, you know, the 25-foot front yard, because it could end up being that it's 60 feet from the property boundary, or it could end up being 56 feet away. You know what I mean? Because because we don't have surveying that is, you know, going into the neighbor's property at this point. So the 58 feet was the kind of the best we had to go on based on the city's mapping.
Any thoughts from NDS? I'm trying to make sense of this.
Mayor, I mean, I definitely would think about it in the sense of when you think of a front yard, 25 feet, there could be a little bit of give and take on that 58 feet, could be 56 feet, 54 feet, but that 25 feet will really govern, because that's going to be from their property line. They can't build anything from their property line back 25 feet.
But depending on exactly how these lines shape up, that 25 feet could turn out to be closer to 35 feet by the time you factor in the other.
It could. They kind of do run that risk of having to adjust their final design when they get to final site plan.
So it sounds, I mean, I'm prepared to think without knowing where the exact lines are, that we've already got a condition that effectively sets that minimum distance at, you know, 35 feet. I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into it. All of which would suggest to me, at least, that the distance, you know, going from 25 to 50 feet, we're already effectively more than 25 feet anyway. I also, I can't help but feel that as long as the design includes an appropriate indoor place for e-bikes and so on off Montebello, so that it's not going to be just everything gets dumped in the front yard of Montebello, that having a micro mobility entrance point there would probably make a lot of sense. I don't have a sense about how I feel about the screening, because frankly I don't understand the difference clearly enough in my own mind between S1 and S2, but anyway.
So the motion on the floor?
We got a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Can we have some, is there some way to get some assurance that if we're going to have a micro-mobility entrance on Montebello, that there will be an interior place to store bikes and the micro-mobility things?
There, as Kevin discussed, there are indoor storage spaces for regular bikes. I think there is an issue with the storage of bikes with batteries that we all know about.
Yeah.
So, we really haven't looked into that. At this point, the plan allows for some screening of the e-bikes, but let me just say that what we were trying to do with this entrance on Montebello was to look at where the world's going with ride share and with zip cars and with stuff, and we are really trying to allow a pull-off for these delivery vehicles, because as Kevin said, there is really no place on JPA. So you guys know what happens in towns or what happens in New York City. The Amazon delivery truck pulls up and blocks the whole road as they're delivering packages. So we thought that this would be, a forward-looking design feature to actually have a delivery pull-off. And it is going to be substantially less traffic, as someone said, on Montebello, because there are currently 6 to 7 spaces there. There were more when that had that whole parking deck covering the whole thing. So, but I don't know if we can address the electric bikes. I don't know how many people actually have electric bikes. Of course, the birds of the word, those will have to stay outside. The rental scooters that people put their cards in, those would have to stay outside.
I'm curious what the difference is between the level of screening that's being asked for. As a practical matter, what's the difference?
Mayor, without getting in too much detail, think of S1 screening as boulevard with trees and a few shrubs. S2 would be screening with maybe some larger shrubs, both evergreen and deciduous, things like camellias, maybe a few camellias and some trees, but you can still kind of see what's behind the shrubs. S3 would be a hedge of privet with some trees.
So that meets the tree canopy concern?
It's separate. So you have several requirements going on. You have a tree canopy requirement. You have a street tree requirement, which street trees can count towards your canopy requirement. Then you have screening requirements.
Okay.
So the request, what actually did the Planning Commission end up recommending on screening?
S1. So they wanted Montebello to be more like the front. So staff, when they originally came to Planning Commission, staff was saying S3, so you would have basically full cutoff between the Montebello side and the development, not treating Montebello as a front yard. There was a lot of conversation at Planning Commission that Montebello should be treated as a front yard, and so the S1 screening was to allow that transparency, so you have some screening to make it feel like a front yard, but there would still be some greenery, but it wouldn't block off the feel of the front yard with Montebello.
It would feel more like a neighborhood, more like a house?
It would feel more like a front yard, like of the development. So whether you were on JPA or Montebello, you feel like you're looking at the front of the development.
Well, I think I am inclined, partly because I have some respect for the folks on the Planning Commission. I'm inclined to agree, to go along with what they're suggesting, because it's outside my wheelhouse. We ready to vote? Motion to approve with all of the various conditions, but no change from the conditions that were recommended by the Planning Commission. Okay, it passes 3-2. Now we have the critical slope waiver, which we have to vote on separately. Do we need a presentation on that?
don't really have one prepared. It's the site, the critical slopes on site are fairly man-made, majority are man-made due to the elevation change between Montebello Circle and JPA. The building itself the existing building takes up most of the critical slopes. The applicant is proposing to meet some of the LID requirements, which have been codified in the proposed draft resolution before you, including the applicant shall implement measures indicated within the low impact development LID worksheet to either to do a bioretention that would hold 5% of impervious drainage area for 8 points, or provide a green roof on the development. So just the nature of the critical slopes and the nature of the development is any redevelopment, you're going to end up with actually better conditions than current, and that just has to do with existing stormwater regulations.
It's basically just hard dirt with some grass on there and concrete.
Correct. So you would have a hard time not making it better with any redevelopment.
Okay. So, do we need to hear any more? Somebody want to make a motion on that?
I'm happy to. I move to approve the resolution for application P23-0049, granting a critical slope waiver for property located at 1709 Jefferson Park Avenue, city tax map parcels 1600100100 with conditions.
Second.
Any discussion?
I'll just note, I noted my obvious opposition to the special use permit, but I visited this site. I think this is purely procedural and has no environmental impact, so I'll be voting
Okay,
yes.
let's vote, please. There we go. Okay, passes 5-0. All right. Next item, anybody feel need for a break? Or want to keep going?
I'm okay.
I'm fine.
Okay, just thought I'd ask.
Thank you for that.
Okay, next item up is...
The adoption of the resolution appeal. It's the
That's right, the appeal of 0 East High Street. Mr. Stroman?
Thank you, Mayor. This is an appeal by the developer, 7 Development LLC, of a decision by the Planning Commission on the Planning Commission's determination that several of the public facilities were not in substantial accord with the comprehensive plan, and correspondence has been shared with the petitioner, and I believe that they have been allotted 10 minutes to present their appeal. It would be appropriate for council to hear from the petitioner at this time.
All right. Is petitioner here or online? Oh, okay. Didn't look far enough to the back of the room. Okay. Welcome, Ms. Long.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. I'm Valerie Long with the law firm of Williams Mullen. We are representing 7 Development, which is the contract purchaser of this property. They're the applicant under the preliminary site plan application at issue, and they are acting under authority pursuant to their contract with the owners to engage in the site plan application and all matters relevant thereto. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Obviously, 10 minutes to cover is tight, so I'm going to hit on some highlights and then invite you to ask me to elaborate on any issues for which you'd like more information. And I have reviewed Mr. Stroman's memo from Friday and prepared to address any of those procedural issues that are raised as needed. Key issue is this application is a preliminary site plan, which is a ministerial act under Virginia law, and as you all know, is not subject to comprehensive plan review if it's a ministerial act. By contrast, rezonings, special use permits, comprehensive plan amendments, zoning ordinances, those are legislative acts that are subject to review under the comprehensive plan. There are code provisions that expressly state that when the preliminary site plan satisfies the applicable provisions of the site plan ordinance, that it must be approved within 60 days. And if it is not approved, that the planning director, the agent, the reviewer, shall provide written information to the applicant with very precise information detailing exactly what change needs to be made, what provision of the ordinance, the site plan ordinance, has not been satisfied. The goal being that for ministerial acts like site plans, that the application should be approved, so the agent should help the developer understand exactly what provisions are not complied with. The 2232 review is under the comprehensive plan section of the both the state code and the local ordinance, and is not part of the site plan provision. Also, we continue to contend that the application, when it was submitted to staff, that is when the 60-day review period started under state code and local code. It talks about submission of an application. Under the local zoning ordinance, preliminary site plans and all site plans are submitted to the agent, which is staff, planning director. They are the agent for the planning commission. It literally says you shall submit preliminary site plans to the agent. There is no process for an applicant to submit a preliminary site plan to the planning commission. Literally no application form, no process. It's never been done before. So we contend that for a variety of reasons, both included in our appeal memorandum and others, that the preliminary, the submittal of the application is what started the clock, and that unfortunately the August 8th hearing was beyond the 60-day period, thus deemed approved. Now, we did elect not to raise that issue at the August 8th meeting following a consultation with Mr. Stroman in advance of the meeting. I'm happy to discuss that more as well. We understand there are significant concerns about development in the floodplain. That's a very reasonable decision or perspective and opinion. That's why the city has a floodplain overlay ordinance and very specific regulations that require any development in the floodplain to obtain, among other things, a floodplain permit. That's a requirement of the final site plan. It's not part of the preliminary site plan. So we understand fully that if those regulations are not complied with at the final site plan stage, then the final site plan will not be approved. But we contend that those issues are not relevant to the preliminary site plan application. In addition, the state and local provisions on substantial accord review, or 2232 review as we call it, are very clear that it is about the project being in substantial accord with the comprehensive plan or part thereof. As you all know, the comprehensive plan is quite lengthy. It covers a broad range of issues. It's, I think, 121 pages, just the one that was adopted in November of 2021. There are a number of provisions that we contend in the comprehensive plan are very consistent with the site plan application. I have some exhibits and handouts I'll provide once I'm finished. Some of those were identified in the August 8th staff report. A number of them were not mentioned. We actually even identified that there is a map under the Bike Ped Master Plan from 2015 that literally shows one of the trails that's proposed on that comprehensive plan map. So that one probably was exempt from the beginning. Even we hadn't noticed that one at the time. There's also, Mr. Sherman has raised a question of standing as to whether our client has or had the authority to submit the appeal of the 2232 decision back in August. Again, we contend that there's no question about that. We have communications, both emails and written correspondence from the owner confirming that from the time the applicant of the site plan signed a contract, which was in, I believe, April of 2020, the applicant had full authority to pursue the site plan application and all things related to it. And I have copies of that communication as well if anyone would like to see it or has questions about that. And the owner may be available either in person or online to confirm that if needed. And finally, as I did touch on in our appeal memorandum, part of what makes this application challenging and maybe new to each of you is because this is not the typical process for a site plan application. We contend that this application actually does not need to be and should not have been part of 2232. There are Other ministerial site plan applications, to our knowledge, have not been subjected to the 2232 review. Mr. Stroman indicates in his memorandum that the city has discretion to do that, and it is clear that that is discretionary, but I would contend that this application is being treated differently than all other applications that are similarly situated in the sense of a preliminary site plan application. And there is a case from 1988 that held specifically that a locality has to apply. In fact, it was directly on point. It was about 2232 review and whether the locality had discretion or not. And it stated that, among other things, it held that the locality must apply the law uniformly and may not make some developers go through the 2232 review process and not others. Mr. Stroman's memo, and this is a little bit technical, and I'm happy to explain or clarify if I can, but there are provisions in both the state and local version of this review provision that provide discretion to the Planning Commission, if they want to deem facilities that are on a site plan, but not the primary provision of a site plan, to be exempted. There was some confusions right before the Planning Commission hearing with a letter that was submitted just a few hours beforehand by a private citizen. I would contend created some confusion that led to some legal guidance from Mr. Stroman to the Planning Commission that I think created confusion. They were told that they did not have that authority to exercise that discretion under local ordinance, but they were not told that they had the discretion under the state provision to look at these public roads and this one parking lot and determine that that they did not need to go through this process. So again, I'm happy to explain that further, but it was stated that the Planning Commission opted not to take advantage of that exception, but I would contend that in fact the record shows that they were told not to take advantage of that discretion, that they should ignore all references to the local exemption procedure that were in the staff report and disregard them completely, and I think they did. But at the same time, they had all right and authority to use the corresponding provision that's in the state code that actually preempts the local code, and I don't believe they were told that. I don't know if they knew that. They may still have decided the same way, even if they were aware, but I would contend that was at a minimum confusion in terms of what's permitted. And finally, we understand that, again, there's issues with the site plan, with the proposal for properties in the floodplain. I do have some other exhibits I can show. There are other parks that have impervious surface in the floodplain. Riverview Park, as an example, has a parking lot that's entirely within the floodplain. Some public facilities, they require some disturbance in order to build parks in the floodplain. Soccer fields are often in the floodplain. That has to go through grading and other outcomes. This is a similar, if the city prefers not, for the developer not to build that larger parking lot that was, I think, parking lot B, the developer's happy to do that. It's I think, a very valuable public amenity for the community. It's widely cited in the comprehensive plan that public access and parking near public parks is necessary and important. But we do ask that you reverse the Commission's decision with regard to the two public roads that are proposed. And again, I see my time has expired, so I will first pass out.
Some good news. Yep.
Just so I can, and it's clear for the public, what I've just distributed is just I think a 5-page compilation that our office prepared, identifying a number of provisions in the adopted comprehensive plan that we believe are consistent with this application. Comprehensive plan is a guide. Not every project can be in line and consistent with every single provision in the comprehensive plan or part thereof. There's a number of components of the comprehensive plan, like the Rivanna River Corridor Plan, It's a balancing to look at projects and identify whether they're in general accord with the plan. I think we've submitted examples of a large number of additional provisions that are.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Thank you. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Folks, questions for the applicant?
None from me.
No.
Response from staff?
Mr. Mayor, just very briefly, I would note that the statute that is the basis for which the appeal is being heard tonight is very clear. I'm referring to 15.2, 2232. The suggestion of ministerial or versus legislative is a bit confusing. So I'd like to just quote the statute itself. No street or connection to an existing street, park, or other public areas, ellipsis in the interest of time, shall be constructed, established, or authorized unless and until the general location or approximate location, character, and extent thereof has been submitted to and approved by the Commission as being substantially in accord with the adopted comprehensive plan, precisely the nature of the proceeding which took place on August 8th. Counsel for the developer refers to another provision in the statute, D, which provides for an optional approach that was not followed in this case by the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission embraced a procedure that is expressly provided and reached its decision. I would just make a couple of other observations with respect to some of the comments of counsel for the petitioner. First of all, there is a reference to whether these improvements were deemed approved by virtue of this deadline that the petitioner takes. Now, I would simply note from the memorandum that was submitted, the submission is submission to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission was received, it was submitted to the Commission on August 1st, 2023. The decision was made on August 8th, 2023, and to suggest that submission to the Commission is somehow synonymous with submission to the staff is ill-founded. I also would note that when the petitioner did appear on August 8th, they offered extensive comment. There were numerous witnesses, including witnesses from the petitioner. Not once during that proceeding was there any suggestion that, hey, this is all unnecessary because we believe that these improvements were already deemed approved. And that, I believe, is an important factor in addressing that argument. And this is in Roman numeral 2 of the memorandum. There is some suggestion that the Commission was somehow denied its right to approve the application using the exception found in 15.22232D, as I've already indicated. That is an optional provision that the Planning Commission did not avail itself of. Instead, it availed itself of a procedure that is expressly permitted pursuant to the statute that I just read. Two other points very quickly. The public facilities, there is this suggestion by the petitioner that somehow there are some other aspects of the comprehensive plan that suggest that perhaps they are in accord. I would say this. The record is clear that the Planning Commission made a very extensive discussion both at its meeting on August 8th and made extensive findings, again pursuant to the statute, at its September meeting, which are part of the record. And it is abundantly clear, I would submit, that there was ample opportunity for the Planning Commission to reach the decision that it did. and that is that Road A and Road B lacked connectivity. There were numerous observations about the environmental issues associated with building on the floodplain and other factors that make that decision sound. There's also the suggestion alluded to by counsel for petitioner that the applicant was treated differently than other applicants. It is black letter law that real estate is unique, and it follows also that developments have unique factors. And to suggest somehow, without any real evidence before this council, that there was some difference in treatment is quite frankly ill-founded and not consistent with the findings that the Planning Commission made. There is a suggestion that a statute that allows the Planning Commission and this council in review to invoke this process when it is deemed appropriate somehow goes out the window if it hasn't been used for a while or not used in other contexts for projects that may be very different from this one, that somehow deprives the city, the Planning Commission and this council of its ability to avail itself of a clear provision in Virginia law, we contend is specious. Finally, with respect to standing, as we said in the memo, it is an easy matter for the applicant to have established standing to present the appeal that they presented tonight, and that is to indicate when an undated authorization of standing was presented to the client, the developer in this case, the petitioner. There was an opportunity to provide that information. That invitation was declined. Accordingly, there is no evidence in the record which suggests when standing was conferred on the petitioner, and unless that standing was conferred on or before the date that the appeal was filed, there is no standing, and this entire proceeding is unnecessary. So for all of those reasons, the analysis of our office is that the appeal of the petitioner is not meritorious. I would defer to the Director of Neighborhood Services and our senior planner in the event that they have any additional comments they wish to make. Thank you.
Mr. Freeze or Ms. Rainey, any comments? If I could just offer my own personal opinion, I am not interested in us trying to hash through procedural issues. I think issues like standing and issues like the deemed whatever, that those may be issues for an appellate court, but I'm not interested in trying to resolve them here. I'd rather get to the merits of the issue.
My opinion is it's clearly appropriate for us to be taking this up tonight, and we should be evaluating it on the merits. Yeah.
Okay.
And I agree. I think that, this project certainly has some positive aspects to it, but overall, I don't think that I can support it. And Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move that council adopt a resolution, A, upholding the Planning Commission decision that Road A and Road B are not substantially in accord with the city's comprehensive plan due to lack of connectivity. In addition, Road A and Road B and the proposed parking lot B raise environmental concerns due to the construction of public facilities, including the addition of impervious surfaces in the floodplain, and resulting in harmful effects on wildlife habitat.
Second.
Okay, and discussion? One thing I would like to add, by the way, and I read through all of the materials that were submitted, including the appeal and so on. I want to disagree with the suggestion that this plan somehow furthers the goal of the comp plan in promoting access to the river. The problem with that argument is that we already have access to the river between Free Bridge and Riverview Park. I'm on the River Basin Commission. when the Rivanna River Basin Commission was thinking about this, what we were most concerned about was not access between Riverview Park and Free Bridge. It was access south of Riverview Park, north of Worley, north of Dardentow Park. And that was the real concern. So to say that this is an improvement in some way because it allows for, I guess, a paved access, whereas now you've just got a dirt access to an area that already has sufficient access, doesn't strike me as being a reason to approve the project. Having said that, I also feel that the arguments that have been made by the planning staff as to Road A, Road B, and the parking area do make a lot of sense. So.
And likewise, I would just agree with that, also being on the Rivanna River Basin Commission. And after carefully evaluating this and hearing the appeal tonight, I concur with what you said, Mayor Snook, as well as I just don't find it in substantial accord with the Urban Rivanna River Corridor Plan, as well as all the elements of the comprehensive plan outlined in the staff report, I think are correct. Just one of them that pops out to me is, not the only one, but one that really pops out is Strategy 7.1 of Goal 7 of Chapter 6 of the comprehensive plan, for both Public Road A and Public Road B, as well as public parking lot within Lot B. So I find that, agree with what's outlined in the staff report, and that's why I will plan to vote yes on the motion that was put on the table.
Okay. Any other discussion from folks?
No.
Ready to vote? Please vote. Okay, motion passes 5-0. Thank you. Let's see, where are we now? The agenda.
You're at your second.
Other business.
Other business and your second community matter.
Mr. Mayor, I do have an item.
Yeah, okay, I got it.
I had such a full report. I do have one item that I would like to share as an update. For People Transit, there was a recent inquiry sent to you all asking that I give an update as to where we are in regards to additional drivers, because that is an ongoing challenge for us. Just wanted to let you know that we are moving forward, as we have been trying to continue to move forward with getting additional drivers. The reference to us getting additional drivers in the month of August was securing drivers. That doesn't mean deploying drivers, because they have to be trained in order to be released onto routes. But as of August 2023, there were 7 potential drivers that we had identified. 2 of those 7 have completed their hiring steps and classroom studies, and they begin training on the road tomorrow. And then we hope to be able to have them ready to transport students in about 3 weeks. In addition to that, we have additional drivers, candidates that are in the review process. That's not our control. We will get them as soon as we can get them, and of them, however many we are able to get. And they also will have about 6 weeks of training before they hit the road. So we are still moving forward. Some of the drivers had endorsements. Some of the candidates had endorsements on their driver's license. So we're able to reduce the training for 3 weeks. But just want to give that update, and we'll continue to give that. I'll make sure that I don't have to make sure of, Mr. Hicks will make sure that you all get regular updates as we go forward with city manager reports as to how we're doing. But we did get notification from schools that almost 500 students were moved off the waiting list in recent weeks. That's a big deal. There's still a considerable number of kids on the list. We are trying our best to work through getting all of them off that list. And as I mentioned earlier today, process is everything. We have triaged all of the students that need to be on a bus: low priority, mid priority, high priority. We are obviously working high priority first, and we will get our way through that list, and our goal is to get every kid on a bus. That is absolutely what is driving the work that is being done at CAT. So I just wanted to give you that update as well.
Yeah, and thank you. This is obviously a huge problem for parents, and appreciate all the work you've put into it. And this isn't a problem that can be solved with grandstanding, so I really appreciate the hard work you've put in.
And also a national issue.
Correct, exactly.
It's an issue all over the country, but I think you and Mr. Williams are doing your best. And for those persons that are listening or looking, whatever the case may be, one of the things that Mr. Williams pointed out to me was you could have 10 applicants and go through the process, and when you finish, you may not have the same 10 that you started with. And there are lots of reasons for that. So because someone tells you there are 10 people in the process, does not necessarily mean at the end of the process there will still be 10. And as you can see, based on what Mr. Sanders just said, they had X amount of people, and 2 people now are ready to do the 3 weeks of training, I believe you just said.
Right.
So you can see how things will happen along the way to impact that. But we appreciate all of the students and their parents for their support as we navigate this process.
And I want to add that there was a meeting last week that Mr. Hicks and I were both at. We're meeting with the county, who of course has all the same problems and probably even worse than we do. Let's just say that we're working between both the city and the county, trying to see if there are ways we can help ease each other's burdens in some way. It's a tough problem, and it's certainly something that has a lot of attention from City Hall. So, okay, anything else in the way of other business? If not, councilors, any other questions that we want the city manager to follow up on? Failing that, let's turn now to the final community matters. We are now at the final speaking opportunity for members of the public. Speakers will be given up to 3 minutes. You may join the speaker queue by selecting the raise hand option on the Zoom webinar, by pressing *9 if you're on phone, or by raising your hand in council chambers. We'll alternate between in-person and virtual speakers. Do we have any speakers here? Yes, ma'am.
My name is Erin Wizak-Amam, and I live on St. Clair Avenue. I appreciate all your work, and it was interesting sitting here thinking people making billions and billions of money in real estate, and I so appreciate your, Mr. Payne, your realization that, hey, let's really look at homelessness. Let's really look at giving some housing, because I think we need to do that at every step of the way. But I really came here initially because I use the parks all the time, and I'm so happy that this happened, that you really, realize that these parks are heavily used, and why put more buildings right next to a beautiful river, and we know what climate's happening right now. So I just appreciate it. As Mr. Sanders, I was mentioning, I was thinking about porta potties they're an easy thing to put up if you could. There's also something called the right to shower that's in a portable shower unit, so just as immediate. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anybody online who would like to speak to us?
Yes, Mayor Snook, we have Carol Thorpe.
Ms. Thorpe, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Very good. Good evening, City Councilor and Mayor Snook and City Manager Sanders. My name is Carol Thorpe. I live in the urban ring of Albemarle County, but less than a mile from the city limits. I'm calling, first of all, I want to acknowledge and thank the husband and wife who spoke separately this evening to express their experience since Market Street Park's curfew had been lifted. I feel like they might have walked out of chambers this evening, perhaps feeling not only not heard, but perhaps disrespected. And I want them to know, if nobody else heard them tonight and appreciated their plight and their comments, that I did. So I going back to Occupy Charlottesville 12 years ago, when I was the chairwoman of the Jefferson Area Tea Party, then primarily for political differences, I had often occasion to come to your chambers and speak in opposition of that encampment. Not in opposition of the homeless, but in opposition to what I perceived as political favoritism at that time. I was very much in support of people who are unhoused, and I do have great empathy for their plight. I try to personally donate and help where I can. Those are two separate issues. Today we're not dealing with the political end so much. But 12 years later, and how many city councils later, this is still an issue. In fact, over the 5 decades, even since the 70s, we've had a largely, if not always, Democrat controlled city council, and this has continued to be a problem. So it is with great hope, City Manager Sanders, that finally, perhaps, this issue can be seriously and effectively addressed. I would like to say one thing, because of my experience with Occupy Charlottesville, that the night of, well, it was actually going into midnight between November 30th of 2011 and December 1st of that same night, this city went through a terrible situation that I hoped it will never be repeated. And that had to do with the physical extraction of the folks that were in the park that night. It should have never come to that. But after 45 days of pretty much lawless living, we had folks who were intoxicated. The police were called to that park daily. Minors were in that park. There was drunkenness, drug use, sexual assaults, and more. It was a terrible time, and I went into council chambers and warned the then city manager, Maurice Jones, that he was looking at a situation that was going to have eventually an inevitable end. And without a proper exit strategy, that folks were going to become accustomed to being in that park, then perhaps becoming strangely comfortable. Then from that might, a feeling of entitlement to stay, which then could come out of, result in some anger and defiance when asked to leave. Let's avoid that this time. Please come up with not only a plan to effectively help the homeless in our city, but please plan for the eventual evacuation of that park. I don't think you're planning on Market Street Park being a forever home to the homeless. So please put some thoughtfulness into that.
Thank you. Okay, anybody else here in person who would like to speak? Yes, ma'am.
Yes. I would like to speak about the rezoning, and I don't know if that's appropriate. It's not.
Sure.
It was
Tell
on
us
the
your name,
agenda.
please.
I'm Gail McDermott, and I live at 604 Orange Street, which is one house off of High Street in downtown Charlottesville. So my home, along with my 2 adjacent homes on Orange Street, are being proposed to be rezoned to CX5 from residential B. And so these 3 homes all share a property line with a digestive health clinic located behind us on High Street and Gillespie Avenue. So based on the new zoning map, I feel that these 3 single-family homes are simply seen as an extension of the neighboring commercial property with a future plan to be developed by changing our current residential zoning to CX5. Now, I'm not here to say that I don't want something in my backyard. On the contrary, I would support an affordable CX5 unit going up literally in my backyard, as long as it's truly affordable to everyone in our community. But eventually, properties such as these 3 homes, if they are rezoned, being adjacent to lots on High Street or other main corridors, will be erased from the neighborhood. Because of their prospective development value, these homes and others like them will fall into the hands of developers. Homeowners proposed to be rezoned as CX5 will simply not be able to afford to stay in their homes. I'd like to take this opportunity to give you a closer look at these 3 residences. I own 2 of the homes. I live at 604. 606, my other home, rents for below affordable housing guidelines. The 3rd home has been an affordable rental to 2 generations of the same family for the last 35 years. Most likely, maybe not this year, but eventually these 3 100-year-old homes will be torn down and developed, and therefore 2 very affordable housing units will be gone. Not to mention, I own 3 other rentals within walking distance of High Street. One is a Section 8, 3-bedroom apartment. One is a 2-bedroom basement apartment that rents for $750. One is a 4-bedroom house that rents for $1,325. Except for one, all of my tenants have rented from me for 10 years or more, all on low fixed incomes. So you can see that for me, even though this is my main source of income, that this is not about the money. Tax assessor who came to visit my 2 properties last assessment period said, well, you should probably think about raising your rents. These are nice rentals. To which I replied, this is not an option for my tenants. They pay their rent on time and they take good care of the properties, and I am not forcing them out. In conclusion, I would just like to say that I would like to remain in my neighborhood, in my home of 23 years, that I support the building of more affordable housing, and yes, even in my own backyard. I sincerely hope that I can afford to stay in Charlottesville and to continue to provide truly affordable housing in my own way to help this community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McDermott. So do we have anyone online now?
We have Jessica Harris.
Ms. Harris, go ahead, you have 3 minutes.
Good evening, Mayor Snook and council members. My name is Jessica Harris. My pronouns are she, her. I am representing tonight the Human Rights Commission as chair. We emailed you on September 26, 2023, as pertinent to our Section 243E of the Charlottesville Human Rights Ordinance. It is the role of our Human Rights Commission to make recommendations regarding the city's annual legislation programs and policies that will address discrimination. During our annual meeting on March 16, 2023, commissioners identified housing as a primary focus of our work in 2023. Commissioners sought out feedback from the community members and subject matter experts regarding specific state-level legislation that may have both local and regional impacts on housing. At another regular meeting on September 21st, 2023, the Commission voted to recommend the following housing-related legislative priorities for you to consider as Council prepares its legislative recommendations for the Thomas Jefferson Area Planning District for referral to the General Assembly. The Commission recommends that the Council support enabling legislation related to the 3 categories. I won't leave them all because you have them before you, but we have them in 3 different categories: affordable housing, accessibility, equity for people experiencing homelessness, and then mental health care accessibility. The Commission welcomes your questions, your feedback, and dialogue with City Council about these recommendations. The Commission also requests that Council communicate regarding the recommendations, including in its proposal to the Thomas Jefferson Area Planning District. Commissioners look forward to planning with Council in advance for submitting legislative recommendations in 2023. Please do not hesitate to reach out to me or the Office of Human Rights should you have any questions prior to making your recommendations, and if you wish to schedule a time to meet. That is what I had to share tonight, but as an individual member of our community, I thank the city lawyer for stepping in during earlier comments. That was very unsettling. Thank you for your time. I
Thank
look
you.
forward to hear.
Thank you, Ms. Harris. Anyone else in person who would like to speak? Okay, anybody else online?
We have Robin Hoffman.
Ms. Hoffman?
Well, I feel like this, I'm Robin Hoffman. I live on Caroline Avenue, which faced the parking lot that was going to be so nice for everybody to see and walk on, I guess. But anyway, what I want to say is I started the Haven when it opened up as a person who actually became the health, well, I called it a health issues sort of collection of data. It was a format that I was used to as a certified school nurse, whereby people who would come in for the first time into a medical community, you try to get as much information so that you could pass it on to other care providers. What I want to say is everything deserves thought. Everything deserves policy. I'm really glad that we have the city council that we have and that we have the manager, but that people who are homeless right now, a lot of times it's unexpected how that happened. And a lot of times it has to do with your medical status. It has to do with, so many things. And I think we forget. We've become complacent, like in terms of that could happen to us at any minute, any time. But it's happening so much right now in every city. And so, yeah, we have to set policies and we have to set procedures, and it has to be like everybody, every single Region 10, the school system, the admissions persons at the hospitals, the discharge people, everybody, home care, have to pitch in and share information and try to help people on an individual basis. I just want to say that as my experience as a nurse and also as an artist working in the public, you know, people have always shared, you know, individual experience that you don't expect. And but thank you all for your work.
Thank you, Ms. Hoffman. Okay, anybody else here? Nope, okay, and anybody else online?
We have Kimber Hawkey.
Ms. Hawkey, you have 3 minutes.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thanks so much for all your work. I'm Kimber Hawkey, lived in Charlottesville for the past 20 years. First, we advocates against the current high-density zoning have been speaking out and showing up for the past 3 years. We're engaged and not sitting back. However, many feel that the city is simply not listening to the severe problems that are in the current comp plan, and that must be fixed before voting on it. We're not fearful against affordable housing, and we actually see a lot of what's going on is blatant kowtowing to money interests in this comp plan, and to boot, all without any guarantee of affordable housing, similar to what we saw with the JPA project tonight. It has been widely admitted that the comp plan upzoning will not create affordable housing, and certainly not the deeply affordable housing needed by the unhoused. Specifically as well tonight, we're speaking out against the failure to provide an updated transportation plan, and we're asking that the city to stop acting illegally in this regard and return to the legal process of providing the state and residents with a transportation plan that fits the current high-density upzoning and the increase in people before any vote is taken. We're also asking for transparency about the financial burdens of high-density upzoning on homeowners, seeing as land valuations will be automatically increased up to 50% according to some of the city assessors. So with that increase in assessments, we all know that it means increases in taxes and associated costs. That will all help or cause people to be driven from their homes as they can't afford the uptick in costs. It's as if there's this non-transparent, systemic gentrification of the entire city that you're causing by a flip of a switch. And we need clear, what are the numbers? How are assessments going to rise with these increased valuations? How will that affect taxes? Everybody should know this very clearly. In a city PowerPoint, it was admitted that there will be automatic hikes in land valuations. What will those hikes be? And what will the costs of be? Yeah, so please fix the transportation plan, be clear and transparent about those hikes and costs before taking any vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Hawkey. Anybody else online?
We have Nancy Carpenter.
Ms. Carpenter?
Good evening, and thank you for letting me address you so late in the evening. I'm Nancy Carpenter, formerly of the city and a homeowner now in another county. But I just wanted to say that I am extremely hopeful after hearing Mr. Sanders' presentation on his strategy and initiative work plan in regards to homelessness, that what started perhaps 10 or 12 years ago, a former previous commenter said, you know, something about Occupy Charlottesville, is now coming to fruition. But I can only just ask one thing, is that you consider putting a lot of people around the table that have lived experience. Every conference that I've attended or watched panels post-conference talk about folks with lived experience. You had two tonight that were comfortable enough to share their housing status with you, and that I hope that if you want to, work through the bureaucracy of what you're dealing with trying to create housing and connectivity for those who are without either, that you definitely put a lot of people with lived experience, either current or former, on your panels, on your work groups, whatever. And with that, I'll say thank you very much, and I'll be watching the strides that Charlottesville will be making in this area. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Carpenter. Next online.
I see another raised hand who goes by Sadie.
All right, Sadie. You have 3 minutes.
You guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. My name is Sadie Enver, and I live over on 1488 White Boulevard. And first off, I'd like to start by saying trans lives matter, Black lives matter. I go by she, her pronouns. And I'd like to comment on the husband and wife couple that came up earlier tonight to go and speak about their disparaging issues with the unhoused. I've been a social worker for 15 years and also a member of the LGBTQ/MAP community for just as long. I spent 5 years working with disadvantaged children, and I had a wonderful time helping to try and make their lives better. But I've spent the last 10 years in the Virginia and West Virginia area, depending on my location and where I've been moving to try and help solve the situation of all these unhoused people. All right? So relating to the housing developer who was building the student housing, mentioning the affordable housing, that is actually not a good solution for unhoused people, because unhoused people, a large percentage of them, have other underlying issues, and I'm not saying mental issues, but there is a reason that they are in their situation, sometimes of their own fault and sometimes not of their own. That's where we social workers come in, and we come in, we meet these people, we talk to them, we feel what they feel, and we try and get them back on the right track. And now, we shouldn't just build, for example, using that student housing example, an 8-story building where there was originally 8 family townhouses, and then go and throw in 80 apartments, 60 apartments, whatever. That is not what's going to help these people. They're not going to be able to keep a steady, secure income without help from the community, without help from me, without help from you. Not you that's in the city council, you as in the community. So from my experience, working with these sorts of people and people in these disadvantaged situations, the best solution is to round them all up and send them back to Africa. All these fucking niggers. Oh my God. Same thing with the kites. Just send them all back, and then we don't have any of these issues. Once we get
to express her protected First Amendment rights, hate speech and speech which tends to breed incitement is unacceptable. Would ask the Speaker to please address the Council in a respectful manner and to avoid references to hate speech and incitement. Thank you.
Heil Hitler. Gas the kikes. Race war now.
Turn it off.
Turn off, David.
Do we have anybody else who would like to speak to us in a civil manner, hopefully?
We have someone with the name Andrew Zarrow.
All right.
Hello?
Hello.
Hello. Good evening. The last caller, so disrespectful, the terrible language. I'm Andrew Zarrow. I would also like to say Black Lives Matter. Stand with Ukraine. Trans kids exist. Trans visibility is valid. I'd like to talk tonight about the homeless encampment at the park. My trans boyfriend and I were walking past the park, and all the homeless were there. We didn't know they were going to be there. We thought that there was a curfew still in effect, and we were viciously threatened and had our possessions taken from us. I consider myself a social justice warrior and would normally give these people benefits of the
Okay,
doubt.
if you have made a police complaint, then please follow through on that.
What is your specific address?
Yes, what is your address?
Well, I didn't get to finish, but I just wanted to express my concerns.
I understand your concern, and we ask everyone to identify themselves and say where they live.
I live at 131 Cascade Road,
Okay, where is that?
Charlottesville, Virginia.
There is no such street in Charlottesville, Virginia.
Jews
Let's
did not
terminate
allow
this
niggers
call,
walk
please.
by.
Let's terminate this call. Do we have anybody else?
We have 6 more, Mayor. Mr. Atkinson.
Okay, Mr. Atkinson?
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right, great. This is Jim Atkinson, 1600 6th Street, SC, Mobile Home Park. Well, this is what I wanted to say. We're tired of being ruled by those that hate our very existence. We are everywhere.
That's another one.
We are
That's
here.
another one.
We cannot coexist with these parasites. We must separate and peacefully.
Okay, we're not going to have
along
that kind of rhetoric in this meeting. Thank you. By the way, well, no, I'm not going to get into that. If anybody wants to make an argument without being nasty to other people, if anybody wants to make an argument without being vulgar or uttering what we now commonly know as obscenities, then we're happy to hear from them. But I'm not interested in hearing more of this kind of
We don't
stuff.
need to hear any pejoratives.
We don't need to hear pejoratives. Is there anybody else who would like to speak to us?
I see a name, Rudy Hess.
Ruby Hess?
R-U-D-Y, Rudy Hess.
Rudy, okay. All right. Rudy, you want to speak to us?
Oh, am I on the call?
Yes, you are.
Perfect. I was just wondering, whatever happened to the First Amendment right in America?
Turn it off,
That's-
David.
That's it. Turn it off.
You know what, we've had for now 5 in a row like that. I think it's time to declare the meeting over. Anybody got any problem with that? All right.
Of course not.
It's 10 o'clock, we're adjourned.